Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Please, Mr. Crouch, please be reasonable. Please let me stay in this apartment for a little longer. I'll get another job as soon as I possibly can, and I'll pay you everything I owe you with interest. If you kick me out, I've got nowhere to go. I'll have to live in my car. Mr. Crouch did not look remotely amused, and I was sure his sympathy towards me was waning thin. I couldn't blame him for that. I mean, if I was wearing his shoes, I'd likely lose patience with people like myself that were always making excuses as to why they could not come up with their rent. Undoubtedly, he had heard it all before. From what I'd deduced, he was a happily married man in his 50s, with a round face, receding hairline, and spirited bright brown eyes that I'd warmed to almost at once the moment I'd met him. I knew he had a daughter of around about my age, and that was why he probably had a quintessential soft spot for me. I expect he imagined what it would be like if his own daughter was homeless, but I think with my requesting for further time before I paid him again had made his patience become as fragile and frail as a piece of rice paper over a nougat bar. I had to be externally grateful to him for his kindness, as most landlords would ruthlessly have thrown me out of my apartment a long time ago. Mr. Crouch had let me live in the apartment rent-free for an entire month, so that I could get back on my feet again. But alas, any job I applied for never lasted very long. The trouble was I was so quick to run my mouth off, which was something my grandmother warned me would one day get me into trouble later on in my life. She had always saliently warned me to guard my tongue, which I failed to do, because if someone was being unreasonable, I'd never been afraid to give them a piece of my mind. And in this politically correct world of ours, where mere words can land you in jail, I really needed to become more aware of anything I uttered, and the offence that I could potentially cause. My last job I'd worked as a waitress in Portland at a local pizzeria. I had observed the branch manager, Mr. Maynard, laying into one of the waitresses for being late, and I felt he was being ruthlessly unreasonable towards her. And so I put my neck on the line for her and ended up walking away with my job no longer intact. Cynthia had never been late before a day in her life, but she arrived at work that morning looking as if the whole world was balancing precariously on her shoulders. But Mr. Maynard had little sympathy for her plight. All he had cared about was her robotically getting on with her job, as if she was run by artificial intelligence, completely devoid of any human emotions. At a glance I could clearly see that Cynthia was visibly upset, but Mr. Maynard did not appear to be discerning or remotely sensitive to other people's feelings. "Why are you late, Cynthia?" he practically roared at her. "I've got a restaurant to run. People waiting. I can't afford for my staff to let me down like this. You were supposed to be here an hour ago. Thanks to you, some tables have received late service and are beginning to complain. I don't need a chaotic restaurant to run. You know how I feel about prompt timekeeping. The last thing we need is unsatisfied customers leaving us a bad review." I'm sorry, Mr. Maynard. I really am, Cynthia had said very gingerly, her puffy red eyes giving her fragile state away. You're sorry. Is that the best you can do, Cynthia? Said Mr. Maynard, rolling his eyes in exasperation and giving her a disapproving frown. Next time you pull this stunt on me, you will be out. Do you understand? Mr. Maynard, I won't ever do it again, I promise. I was just a little... Before Cynthia could finish her sentence or explain the reason for her late arrival, Mr. Maynard ungraciously waved a dismissive hand at her. I don't need to hear your whinging, Cynthia. Now get back to work, will you? There are tables that need to be served. Cynthia had burst into tears, but the manager had told her to get her act together and go and wash her face before she waited tables. Cynthia had just learnt a member of her extended family had passed away in an accident, so she was naturally upset, even if he was a distant uncle of hers. I had comforted a very distraught Cynthia in the ladies' cubicle, returning with my whole body jiggling with indignation. Once again my words defied my trust. I told Mr. Maynard in no uncertain terms that he was a prize jerk for treating Cynthia so abysmally. Cut her some slack, Mr. Maynard. You're a jerk, are the exact words that I had brazenly used on him. They had unflinchingly popped out of my mouth, rather like popcorn bouncing out of hot oil. Mr. Maynard's eyes widened, as if he couldn't believe what I'd just said. What did you say, Madison? I said cut her some slack, will you, Mr. Maynard? You don't know what she's been through. No, you said something else after that, Madison. Did you just call me a jerk? To be fair, I could have lied outright, insisting that Mr. Maynard had heard me all wrong, and no, of course, he was not a jerk. But then again, I wasn't a liar, so I truthfully said against my wise, judicious judgment, Yes, I did say you were a jerk, Mr. Maynard, but it was no more than you deserved. Cynthia had some very bad news. You could see the state she was in when she arrived at work. If you must know, an uncle of hers died, and you laid into her for being late. You should have treated her more kindly. Couldn't you see how upset she was? Is that right, Madison? I'd like to remind you who is boss around here. What I say goes. I don't need a jumped-up start like yourself calling me a jerk. Get your things, Madison, and go at once. Consider yourself sacked. Mr. Maynard, I'm begging you. I'm really begging you. Please don't do this to me. Please don't. I really, really need this job. You yourself have said I'm one of the best waitresses you've ever had. I depend on this job to pay my rent. You should have thought about that, shouldn't you, Madison, before you chose to call me a jerk. Now get lost, will you? Yes, you are a first-class waitress, but I do not keep people in my employ who betray my trust like this. I had left the Italian restaurant very shamefully, with my tail between my legs. I tried desperately to find another job, but I only acquired a job at an ice cream parlour for 2 days a week, and the pay was pitiful. My grandmother paid money into my account every month to put towards my fine arts degree that I had never enrolled in. Let's just say I really was in a tragic place financially. I'm sorry, said my landlord, Mr. Crouch, after he'd given me my marching orders. It seemed everybody wanted to get rid of me at the moment, and I expect he was no exception to this rule. He continued rather reluctantly. I'm going to have to let you go, Madison. I don't like doing this at all. I need you to understand that. I gave you a full month free so that you could get back on your feet. Your deposit paid for your previous month's rent. I'm afraid I'm not running a charity here. I'm making a living out of renting these apartments. If I let everybody get away without paying their rent, there would be hell to pay. I wouldn't be able to provide enough for my family. I'm very sorry, but you're going to have to go. Mr. Crouch, you've been so good to me. You're right. I've definitely outstayed my welcome. I'm very thankful and grateful to you for your patience and for giving me this last month's rent free. I'm only sorry that I haven't come up with the funds to pay you for this month's rent. I've struggled to find a decent job to cover my expenses. It's so tough out there, Mr. Crouch. You have no idea. I told you about Mr. Maynard at the Italian pizzeria over the road. He fired me for no good reason."
"I'm sorry you've had it so tough, Madison. Life can be brutal at times. Please take care,"
said Mr. Crouch, looking surprised that I'd put up no fuss about leaving my apartment. But let's just say a condemned man knows when he's lost the battle, and I knew any pleading with Mr. Crouch would fall on deaf, rather useless ears. The man had been incredibly good to me, and I didn't want to take advantage of his kindness. He had a marshmallow-like heart, and those kind of people are pretty special in my book, and they don't deserve to be exploited. Mr. Crouch looked at me through a furrowed brow.
"You're a very nice girl, Madison. You know I've got a daughter your age. You remind me a lot of her. You even bear an uncanny resemblance to her, which is slightly disconcerting for me, because in the circumstances it makes it 1,000 times harder for me to tell you to leave. I would hate to see her getting her life in a tangle like you have done, and having someone like me throwing her out of her apartment. This is not easy for me, Madison. I need you to know that."
"Mr. Crouch, I know that, and you're an incredibly kind man. And if it makes you feel any better, I'm quite sure your daughter is far more astute than I am, far too clever to get caught up in some of the webs I've got entangled in. Let's just say I've got myself into this mess all on my own, and I'm going to get out of it." Mr. Crouch looked visibly upset by my candour. It really was a struggle for him to tell me to go. He looked at me with a withered expression of great disquiet on his face, and said rather gingerly,
"Have you not got any family to go home to? Your parents wouldn't be happy to know you were living in your car, as you intend to do, Madison. It is no way to live for a young lady like yourself. It's not healthy, and you do realize it is potentially dangerous. I would hate my daughter to be sleeping in a car at night. There's some nasty people out there who could wish to prey on a young lady like yourself. Don't be too proud to go back home, Madison. I know how youngsters are these days. You forget I was young once. You worry your parents will be disappointed in you, I suspect. Nothing could be further from the truth. I'm sure your parents love you very much indeed, and above anything else in the world, they want to know that you're safe and well. We all slip up from time to time, don't we? Sometimes we need a helping hand. There is no shame in reaching out to your parents for help. I'm sure they will not judge you. They will only be too happy to help you to get back on your feet again. Whereabouts do your parents live, Madison, if you don't mind my asking?"
"I don't have any parents, Mr. Crouch," I said flatly, unable to hide the crack that seemed to erupt in my voice, so it sounded more like a squeak. Even all these years later, talking about my parents tugged at my heartstrings. Ostensibly to talk about two people I'd never known in my life was a reminder of all that I'd lost. It had a way of breaking me down like nothing else in the world did. "As I was saying, I don't have parents, Mr. Crouch," I repeated. "They died when I was about 8 years old in a car accident. A lorry was driving on the wrong side of the road. It drove right into them, ploughed into their car. There was a head-on collision. They were killed on impact, and were announced dead at the scene. The police said they would never have stood a chance. Their death was instantaneous. I think they said the driver was as drunk as a skunk, so he was put away for many years in prison. He did write me a letter of apology, you know, stating that he had drunk so much because his daughter had been diagnosed with cancer." Mr. Crouch looked visibly horrified. His hand immediately cupped his mouth.
"Your parents died in an automobile accident? I don't know what to say. How dreadful. I'm so sorry, Madison. I had absolutely no idea. You poor thing. I cannot imagine what it must have been like growing up without parents. My parents gave me the stability to make the best of my life. Without their guidance, I'm not sure how far I would have got in my life. I've had to work hard, Madison, but I had no idea things were this bad for you. No idea at all."
"You don't need to feel sorry for me, Mr. Crouch. I don't even remember my parents. It happened a long time ago, so I've never missed them, because I never knew them, if you know what I mean. I miss the idea of them. I've always envied people who have two parents. But I think not remembering them is probably a saving grace for me. It's easier not to miss people you don't remember, don't you think? Mr. Crouch looked physically pained, hearing my story. It seemed to really affect him emotionally, which made him, I suspect, feel worse about throwing me out. But I wasn't looking for his sympathy or any handouts on his part. My parents' death had happened a long time ago. Given that I'd never remembered them, I felt no pain. But I did feel the loss of not being raised by two parents, as when I was a child, I had enviously compared myself with other children of my own age, who grew up in a loving family environment with two parents at the helm of their ship. I had friends at school complaining bitterly about being grounded for stuff, and I remember I'd privately think to myself, "Quit complaining. You don't know how lucky you are to have two parents who really care about you. If they're punishing you, I guess it actually means they love you." I did, of course, realise back then that I'd almost certainly drawn the short straw. But I guess you just can't have everything in life, because it doesn't work like that. I would enviously watch other children's parents picking up them religiously from the school gate every day. They were always there for their children, fussing over them, supporting them in sports games, parents' evenings, school fetes, and so forth. So yes, I will admit, I'd often wonder what it must be like to have two loving parents. And I missed my parents in the way you might miss a dog you never got to own, or a place you longed to visit but never ever did.
"So who raised you, Madison?" asked Mr. Crouch. "If your parents weren't there, who took care of you? You weren't adopted, were you? Or caught up with social services and their foster care system?"
Mr. Crouch pulled a disingenuous face.
"I hope the latter didn't apply to you, Madison. You hear unfortunate stories about children in foster care that don't bear repeating."
"No, nothing like that. I was never in foster care," I said. Mr. Crouch looked visibly relieved.
"I'm glad to hear that."
I continued. "If you must know, Mr. Crouch, it's my father's mother who raised me. That is my grandmother Doris. I've lived with her all these years. She sends me money every single month to pay for a fine arts degree, but she's got no comprehension of how much these things actually cost, so I use the money to pay for food and things that I need. I think my grandmother Doris still lives in another time, if you know what I mean, as back in her day, everything was so very cheap. If I go back home, she'll wonder why I'm not doing my fine arts degree, which I can't possibly afford. I haven't got the heart to tell her that the money she sends me would never cover an arts degree, and that all this time I've not been doing any arts degree at all, because I simply haven't got the money to pay for it. It's a bit of a tricky situation, Mr. Crouch. If things were less complicated, I would go home in a heartbeat, Mr. Crouch. But if I did return home to Granny Doris, she'd never understand what I was doing there, if I'm supposed to be doing this fictitious arts degree. I've been telling her it's going very well, and that makes her so happy. You see, she would have loved to have done a degree in fine arts herself. So my getting to do something she loves has enabled her in some way to live vicariously through me, if you know what I mean. Imagine if I tell her I've been lying to her all along. I did apply for a scholarship but never got one, so it is what it is. You have to tackle the rough with the smooth, don't you, Mr. Crouch? Mr. Crouch looked visibly stumped, as if what I was telling him made absolutely no sense at all. His face broke out into a furrow of lines.
"But what about a student's loan from the bank? Or financial assistance? That's what the youngsters do nowadays, don't they? To pay for their further education. They pay off their debts later on in life. Could you not have done the same? I'm quite sure the bank would not be adverse to giving you a loan for your fine arts degree. And I'm sure in your spare time you could also find a waitressing job to bring in that extra income. Lots of students do this. I can't understand why you didn't just get a loan. It's the most sensible thing to do in the circumstances."
Mr. Crouch, you don't understand. I absolutely abhor loans of any kind. Loans can crucify you. I don't want to be spending the rest of my life raising the money to pay off a large student debt. The thought of all that debt would make me lose sleep at night. I'm already losing sleep at night over paying for my living costs that I can't afford, So having to pay off a fine arts degree would be insufferable as far as I'm concerned. I've seen students around, Mr. Crouch. They have excessive student loans. I don't know how they sleep at night. I really don't. Sooner or later that money is going to be demanded from them.
Oh dear, said Mr. Crouch. The sticky webs we weave for ourselves. You've certainly got yourself into quite the pickle, young lady. Would it be so dreadful to tell your grandmother the truth? I think everybody knows how expensive education is these days. It's a given. Would it really be so hard to tell her the true cost of the degree you want to undertake? Maybe she needs a bit of a reality check or a rude awakening. Life these days has changed exponentially since she was a young lady. I'm sure she's very aware of this fact. But maybe she has no comprehension of how expensive education has become these days. In my experience, some of the older generation simply don't have a clue about things like this. I know when I told my mother the cost of my daughter's university degree, she nearly passed out with shock. She couldn't believe the expense. She wanted to contribute, you see, towards my daughter's education costs, until she realized how excessive they were. Daylight robbery, I think she called it. She's not wrong about that. You could still apply for a loan to get that fine arts degree that you want, Madison, or financial assistance of some kind. Look, you can tell me to mind my own business if you like, but I would strongly recommend you do that. Ostensibly, the banks are very accommodating in that regard. They like to support students. It's not too late, you know, to apply, and you should consider it. Being a waitress for the rest of your life is not a way to live, as those fleeting jobs come and go. Don't they? They slip through your fingers like butter running down a corn cob. I can see you're a very bright girl, Madison, with a promising future ahead of you, I'm most sure. But like anybody else, you need something substantial behind you to guarantee you earn a reasonably good income in the future. We all need security in our lives. Life is never easy. Why do you think there's so many unsatisfied people out there? Living their lives like a hamster on a wheel, working from 9 to 5, doing a laborious job they hate. They know it's not easy to provide for their families, but they do what they have to do to survive.
I thought about Mr. Crouch's sobering words, and they did give me pause for thought. You make some good points, Mr. Crouch, you really do. If you must know, I was hoping to get a job as a restaurant manager, so that I could raise enough money to eventually pay for a fine arts degree, through my own efforts, if you know what I mean. I don't have to be in a hurry to attain it, do I? There's no rush. I know some students take a couple of years off before they undertake a degree of any kind. And there's a lot to be said for that, because when you get back from your travels, you may rethink what it is that you want to do. Talking about doing a late degree, I heard of this one woman who went to university, Mr. Crouch. She was 83 years old. Can you believe that? She got a degree behind her. She studied with the younger students. She was radiant about her successes, absolutely radiant. It was brilliant to watch. Mr. Crouch cocked his head back in a stiff laugh.
Good on the old lady who did that. I am impressed. I take my hat off to her. It's never too late to get an education, you know. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. But getting a loan from the bank, it's the same thing as working as a restaurant manager to pay off the debt. Either way, you're going to have to pay it off by working, one way or another. You might as well be paying the bank back doing something you really love, like fine arts, that will advance your career. You should think about it long and hard, Madison. It's so important to have some education behind you, to help you in your future. If your parents were around, they would tell you as much. I'm sure they would actively encourage you to take the bull by the horns and go for that degree. I want the same for my daughter, Madison. Believe it or not, she's doing a law degree. She's taken out a sizable student loan, which she'll pay off easily in the years to come, I suspect. I assure you she gets plenty of sleep at night, even with that debt hanging over her head. She knows she will easily pay it off, in due course, when she gets that quintessential job. You'd be wise to do the same.
I'm sure that's true, Mr. Crouch, and that your daughter will make a fabulous attorney one day. And with the rate they pay attorneys, Well, she's got it made, hasn't she? She'll pay the loan off in a heartbeat. But a fine arts degree is very different. It's much more complicated and tumultuous. The road to success is never guaranteed, and it's a lot more rocky, I suspect.
Well, I can't say I know much about fine arts, Madison. I don't know anything about the arts. But all the same, think about what I've said.
I will, Mr. Crouch. You've certainly given me food for thought, and I appreciate it. Don't worry about me, though. I'll be fine.
Look, young lady, I wish I didn't have to throw you out like this. And after all you've told me, I feel like a prize cad, telling you that there's no room at the inn. If I had another choice, I would let you stay here for a lot longer. But as it is, my wife is already giving me a rather hard time for giving you this apartment rent-free, shall we say, for an entire month. My wife is as tough as an old pair of boots. She's got about as much compassion as a boa constrictor. But I love her all the same, warts and all. If I gave you another month's rent-free, let's just say my life would not be worth living. She's been on at me to throw you out, and I promised her I would give you your marching orders today, he said sorrowfully. I hate doing this to you, Madison. Sometimes I think I'm not cut out to be a landlord.
Mr. Crouch, I don't know why you're apologizing to me. There's nothing to apologize for. I should be the one apologizing to you for outstaying my welcome and taking advantage of your kindness. I'm very sorry your wife has given you a hard time over this. When I get the money, I hope to pay you for the month's rent you gave me free, and I do mean that.
It's not necessary, Madison. It's been a pleasure to help you, said Mr. Crouch, waving his hand dismissively. Consider it a gift. More to the point, Madison, where are you going to go after this? If you have so little money, please don't tell me you're going to live in your car. I couldn't bear it if you did that. Not that it's any business of mine, of course. Surely you can reconsider returning to your grandmother's house. I don't mean to go on at you about this, but I think it's a wise decision. I think you should be completely honest with her.
It's a bad idea, Mr. Crouch. I told you I simply cannot do that. You see, Mr. Crouch, my grandmother is a lot like you. She has the kindest heart you've ever seen. I don't want to take advantage of her kindness. Let's just say if Granny Doris knew the truth, she'd probably liquidate everything she's got to send me to this arts college. And I'd hate her to do that. She'd be the first person in the world who would give me even the shirt on her back in order to pay for my, course. If you think I've got an aversion to borrowing money, Grandmother Doris is 1,000 times worse than I am. Her aversions to debt run very deep. I've grown up with my grandmother teaching me that borrowing money is a bad, bad idea. She's never trusted the banks for a single second. She's buried money on her own property, a treasure trove, I believe, so no one can find it. That's how wary she is of the banking system. Granny Doris has money, I'm not sure how much, but she's clueless about how much things cost these days. She lives in a completely different world of her own. She does a lot of bartering, you see, with the produce she grows. She has a kitchen garden full of incredible vegetables. She's got naturally green fingers. She's grown watermelons so large they'd blow your mind. She has incredible free-range eggs, which she sells at the market. Mr. Crouch stopped to consider my words, and then he paused for a brief moment and said,
If you don't want to go to your grandmother's house, there is somewhere you could go, but I'm not sure it'll be what you're looking for. But at least it would be a roof over your head. And I, for one, will rest easier in my bed, knowing that you're safe and not living in your car.
There is a place I can go? I asked, hardly daring to believe that my fortunes might be about to change. Well, a roof over my head sounds like a promising start, Mr. Crouch. It's better than living in my car, for sure.
Well, this place is about 2 hours outside of Portland, in a countrified, rather rural area, with the nearest town about 20 minutes away. You might be able to find a waitressing job there. Many tourists pass through the area, so they have some nice restaurants around. Now, I've got a house in the countryside that once belonged to my father, who left it to me in his will. I grew up there, you see. Never had the heart to sell the place, although my wife tried to encourage me to do so, but I refused. I'm a little nostalgic like that, if you know what I mean. Well, this place is about 2 hours outside of Portland, in a rural area. The nearest town is approximately 20 minutes away or so. You might be able to find a good waitressing job there, at the town, I mean. Many tourists pass through the area, so they have some nice restaurants around. Now, I've got a house in the countryside that once belonged to my father, who left it to me in his will. I grew up there, you see. Never had the heart to sell the place. I'm a little nostalgic like that, if you know what I mean. My wife desperately wanted me to sell up, because that's what she wanted. But I put my foot down on that, and I've been renting the place out ever since.
But of course you'd want to keep the place, Mr. Crouch, if you're attached to it, that is, especially if you grew up there. I understand that. It's hardly a surprise you want to keep it.
Well, I let out the property to a very nice couple called the Pearsons. They're in their late 50s, so their children have long since left home. The couple live in the main house, which is called Red Vine Mansion. Don't ask me why it's called that. I don't know where the name comes from, but if I'm to guess, I would say there might have been red vine growing in front of the house, and that's where the name came from. Suffice to say, there is a pool house at the bottom of the property that they don't ever use. The Pearsons have about as much interest in swimming as a spider has in taking a dip in the water. The couple both have a complete aversion towards the water. I think it's because when Mrs. Pearson was a little girl, she very nearly drowned in a swimming pool. It took her several EMTs to give her CPR to bring her back to life. Ever since then, she's never gone near the water. I suspect she suffers from some form of PTSD, even though it happened a significantly long time ago. I know the Pearsons don't ever use the pool house. It's kitted out with a kitchenette, bed, bathroom, and everything you could possibly need. It's a self-contained flatlet, if you like. But back in my father's day, it was used for parties and stuff like that. My parents were quite big socialites. They were always hosting the most fabulous parties. I could phone the Pearsons, if you like, and ask them how they feel about you living in the pool house. Maybe they will appreciate having someone on the property. I'll make a couple of phone calls and see if they will agree to this arrangement. They might want you to pay for electricity, but they're good people, and I don't see why they should refuse my request. I've known the Pearsons for many years. I was at school with Monty Pearson, who is a successful attorney in the local town.
When Mr. Crouch told me that the Pearsons had said I could live in the pool house, I thought as if God had rained down manna from heaven. Moving into the pool house would give me time to think about what course of action to take in regards to my fine arts degree that I had put on hold. Maybe Mr. Crouch was absolutely right, and I should take out a student loan and be done with it. His salient words were beginning to filter through my mind and take root inside of me. They made sense. Why had I not thought about things this strategically before? That's the problem with not having parents to influence you. I miss their judicious wisdom to help me navigate my way through the labyrinths of life. Don't get me wrong, Granny Doris tried her best, but sometimes I felt as if she was caught up in a 1940s time warp. From the old-fashioned way she dressed to the way she viewed the world. Sometimes she'd even open up her purse, grab a few pennies and hand them to me, telling me to buy something nice for myself. And the amount she would give me would barely cover a cup of coffee, but I never told her that. How could I? My grandmother lived a modest life on a cottage on the Suttons' farm, but she owned the cottage lock, stock and barrel, along with a small parcel of land, where she grew her prize vegetables. The Suttons were distant relatives of ours. They were always buying produce in bulk from flour to sugar, so invariably they'd give my grandmother generous and free handouts in return for her cooking for them. And she would cook up a storm every time that would easily have impressed the Queen of England herself, were she to still be alive. Granny Doris was pretty much self-sufficient in every sense of the word, so her humble perception of money was very misguided, because she never spent very much. If I acquired a student loan, I wouldn't have to continue lying to Granny Doris about my fine arts degree, and that would make me feel significantly more at ease. My grandmother was quick to pick up if I was spinning a yarn. She was as sharp as a hawk in that regard, which was why in recent months I had avoided visiting her, as I was afraid she'd read me like a book and say something like, "Why do I get the ominous feeling that you haven't been doing a fine arts degree, Madison?" I knew she'd tell by my deflated demeanour that something was almost certainly up, and knowing her as I did, she would drag the truth out of me. I knew my grandmother would sell everything she owned to pay for my college and dig up the money if she had to, that she'd buried in the yard, and I was never ever going to let that happen. When I got to Red Vine Manor, I would try and find a waitressing job, I thought, in the nearby town, like Mr. Crouch had suggested. I couldn't believe his generosity, so it goes to show there really are good people in this world. I was not sure what the pool house would be like. I wasn't expecting anything special, of course, but anything had to be better than living in my car. As my grandmother always used to say, beggars cannot afford to be choosers. Finding my way to the address Mr. Crouch had given me was much more precarious than I imagined it would be, because my GPS kept annoyingly losing signal, as if it was getting some kind of macabre pleasure out of toying with me. It did make me wonder what it must have been like in the days of old, when you had to find a location by using a map. I found myself driving down a squiggle of ancient-looking roads that seemed well off the beaten track, if you ask me. One looked much like another, and trees fringed the borders of the roads, so I rather felt that I was looking for a needle in a haystack, so to speak. How the hell was I ever going to find this place? If things carried on this way, I might well end up sleeping in my car after all. I sighed with relief when my frustration was eased by the presence of a young teenager riding his bike down the country road. Maybe he could help me, I thought. I hooted and the young man stopped on his bicycle. He looked briefly over his shoulder at me, with a frown creasing his forehead. I suspect he probably was wondering how anyone could be so rude as to hoot at him, but I needed to get his attention. I stopped my car in the middle of the road, as I hadn't seen any traffic for miles. I began to wave at the young man furiously, hoping to get his attention, and that he could see me through my dusty windscreen window, which thankfully he appeared to have done. To my relief, his face burst into a warm, friendly smile. He gave me a thumbs up, a nod, and promptly cycled over to my car. He dismounted from his bicycle and casually placed it up against the trunk of a tree. He walked over to my car. I wound down my driver's side window to talk to him. The handsome teenager looked as if he was under 6 foot tall. He was very lean and wearing an open red plaid jacket over a white t-shirt and a pair of blue denim jeans that were definitely more on the trendy side. At a fleeting guess, I would have put him at about 18 years old, but he could have been older by a couple of years. He gave me a goofy grin and said, "Don't tell me you're lost, ma'am. Your GPS has abandoned signal. You don't know where the hell you are going, and more to the point, where you are. It can be confusing around these parts if you don't know the area well. And don't take this the wrong way, ma'am, but I can tell you're not from around here. You're too tense to be a local. People around here tend to be very relaxed." "Yes, you're right on all counts. How do you know all this?" I asked. "As it happens, my GPS is not behaving itself very nicely. It's giving me a hard time. I can't possibly get a connection, no matter how hard I try. And yes, I admit I'm hopelessly lost. Everything around here looks exactly the same, and for all I know, I could have been driving around in circles, up and down the same roads again and again. Everything is so badly marked." The young teenager nodded. "I thought as much," he said, shrugging his shoulders nonchalantly. "Lots of visitors to the area get hopelessly lost around here. You won't be the first, nor will you be the last. Let's just say there's something rather mysterious about this area. It's rather like the Bermuda Triangle. Things happen around here, you see. Bizarre things. People have gone missing for centuries in these parts, without any plausible rhyme or reason. You often can't get a GPS signal very easily around here. It's also like that with our internet service. It drives me completely bonkers. I don't know what it is about this area, but it seems to invite the weird, the outlandish, and the peculiar, if you know what I mean." I didn't know what he meant, but I nodded and smiled at him rather lamely. My only concern was to find Red Vine Manor, and by the looks of things, this teenager would likely know where this obscure place actually was.
"So where did you need to go, ma'am?" he said, as if reading my mind. "I've got a very good sense of direction, you know. I've lived in these parts all my life, so I can navigate my way around here practically blindfolded. Not that I would, of course," he said with a chuckle, as if enjoying his own sense of humour. "Are you being serious? How could you possibly know the wood from the trees around here? I would get hopelessly confused." "No, I don't get confused by anything around here, ma'am," he said, pulling out a box of cigarettes from the top pocket of his red plaid jacket and offering me one. "No, thanks. I don't smoke," I said. "Mind if I do?" he asked me casually, with a kind of easy-going, placid attitude that suggested he had all day to tell me how to get to Red Vine Manor. Were the country folk around here this laid back, I wondered? It would seem so. No wonder he thought I was tense. For someone as pent-up as myself, from living a fast-paced lifestyle in Portland, I was not used to this carefree, nonchalant approach to things. My life was always about deadlines, punctuality, peppered with a plethora of stress. But out here, even the trees seemed calm and serene, as if everything around here, with the exception of myself, was almost in a meditational stance. "Of course not. You're welcome to smoke," I chuckled. "It's a free world, isn't it? But I really would appreciate your help in directing me to Red Vine Manor, if you don't mind. I had certainly hoped he would give me directions long ago, so that I'd be well on my way. But this man was clearly in no rush. "Of course," said the young teenager. "Where are you intending to go?" As he said this, he blew out circles of white smoke into the air. I watched in fascination as they dissipated. I'd never seen anyone do that so effectively before. "I want to go to a house called Red Vine Manor. You don't happen to know it, do you?" The young man's eyes lit up like a Christmas tree. His lips turned up into a big triumphant smile. "Are you kidding me? You want to go to Red Vine Manor? That's exactly where I'm going." "You are?" "Yes, I work for Mrs. Pearson. I'm a groom for their horses. I'm running a bit late this morning, I'm afraid. I do have a dreadful propensity in oversleeping. It drives my mother mad. If you follow my bicycle, ma'am, I'll lead you directly to Red Vine Manor. It's not visibly marked, so it's very easy to miss." The young man studied me curiously. "Do you mind me asking what your business is with the Pearsons? I know they've been looking for a cleaning lady. Are you the cleaning lady that they've probably hired? I know Mrs. Pearson mentioned something about advertising for a cleaner." "I don't have any business with the Pearsons, not really. I'm just going to be living in their pool house on their property. The owner of Red Vine Manor is a man called Mr. Crouch. I don't know if you know that, but he was my ex-landlord. He grew up at Red Vine Manor, and when his dad died, he inherited the property, which he refuses to sell, because of the nostalgic feelings he has towards the place. The Pearsons rent the property from him. He made a few phone calls on my behalf, as I have nowhere to live at the current moment. I understand the pool house is not occupied, so I was very grateful the Pearsons have agreed to let me live there. I badly need a roof over my head, you see, or I'll be sleeping in my car for the foreseeable future." The young man whistled. "You're going to live at the pool house on the Pearsons' property?" he repeated, with a stupefied look on his face. "Rather you than me, that's all I'm saying, ma'am." "What?" I asked, raising a brow. "Is it run down or something? Well, I can cope with a little dilapidation, as long as the roof isn't leaking. I can't abide a leaking roof. I mean, in my situation, I can't afford to be fussy, as I'm pretty much homeless, so to speak." The young man was unsettlingly quiet for a brief moment. I watched as his back straightened. I was sure his jaw was clenching. "It's not that, ma'am," he said rather reluctantly. "No one goes to the pool house, so it is currently unoccupied. The Pearsons don't swim, you see. But then I expect Mr. Crouch told you as much." "That's right. That's what I gathered," I said. "Mr. Crouch felt the Pearsons didn't use the place, so that I could take advantage of it. Is there a problem or something?" For a moment the young man looked rather like a deer caught in headlights. It seemed my question had unravelled him a little. He became rather guarded, and then he said in a muted tone of voice, "Remember what I was saying about GPS signals and the internet connections around here? The weird things that tend to happen in these parts.
Oh, you mean I won't get an internet connection when I'm at the pool house? In truth, that's the least of my concerns. I'm not worried about that at all.
No, it's not that, said the teenager. It's true. You'll be unlikely to get good signals from the pool house. But that's not the problem. I would just advise you to be very careful, ma'am. That's all I'm saying. And when I say careful, you have been warned.
Careful? What about? I asked, looking perturbed. Why would I need to be careful? I think you better explain yourself. You're freaking me out a little talking like this. Should I be worried about moving into the pool house? Is that what you're saying?
It's not the pool house that's the problem, ma'am. It's the location. The pool house is situated at the end of the Red Vine property, opposite the Gremlin's Woods. That's where the problem actually lies.
The Gremlin's Woods, I said, raising a brow. That's a weird name. It's a kind of creepy name, don't you think?
Everything's creepy about the Gremlin's Woods. It's my guess it got the name from the original owners, for being less than auspicious, so to speak. Many people believe in these parts that some of the woods around here are haunted, but the Gremlin's Woods is the very worst of them all. It's the most formidable place. There are stories all about the Gremlin's Woods. My dad told me that they go back for generations. 2 sisters in the 1800s went into the Gremlin's Woods. They were never ever seen again, disappearing into plain sight. But some people have claimed to see their ghost wandering around these parts. One man in a pickup truck lifted up 2 sisters, whom he described as wearing old-fashioned dresses. They told him they wanted to go to town, but when he turned around to address them, they had all but vanished. I mean, how do you explain something like that, ma'am? Now that's what I call creepy. The poor man was so freaked out, he literally hightailed it home, wondering what the hell it was that he'd seen. He never quite got over the experience, you know. My father was the one to warn me to be very, very careful and not to venture anywhere near the Gremlin's Woods. There are things in there, ma'am, that are not of this world, if you know what I mean. My father was asked to chop down some trees in the Gremlin's Woods for Mr. Crouch's father, and something really, really scary happened to him, which he refused to talk about. He's never told us what happened to him, but the place is bad, ma'am, really bad. Make sure you don't go venturing into those woods, or you might never ever be seen again, and I don't say that lightly. Even when you look at the woods from a distance, you can feel the evil. It shoots right through you like a cold chill. There's something in those woods, something fiercely dangerous. I know I'm not making this up. The danger is tangible. Mrs. Pearson's own horses won't go anywhere near the place. And you know what animals are like, ma'am. They can sense things that we don't.
Was this young man really being serious, I wondered? He didn't appear to be pulling my leg. I stared at him incredulously. This time I was the one to own a pair of rather bewildered wide eyes. Did this, by all accounts, seemingly perfectly sane 18-year-old genuinely believe all the baloney he was spouting, all the weird stories his father had so obviously made up? I studied him closer, feeling rather intrigued. He was a nice-looking 18-year-old, with a splattering of freckles on his very refined-looking nose. He had very sincere eyes that were a rather intriguing colour, like that of dirty ice with glimmers of blue in them. They were lovely eyes. The young man had stopped smoking. He shook his flaxen blonde hair, that tumbled messily over his face, in a short curtain. He threw his cigarette onto the ground, stamping it out friskily with his leather boot. The expression on his face seemed genuinely concerned, that any preconceived thoughts that this might have been a joke or a wind-up of some kind simply dissipated. Was it possible in this day and age, when we're supposed to be a whole lot less superstitious, that stories from generations going back for centuries could make people fall victim to their fictitious rumours? By the looks of things, this young man was very definitely a believer in all things that go bump in the night. Thank God I wasn't so susceptible to tall stories like this, or I really would be in trouble. Ostensibly, the current rather meagre state of my depressing finances had always deprived me of a good night's sleep, and I didn't want it to continue that way. And adding superstition to their heartless ingredients would almost certainly encourage even more restlessness on my part, so that I'd wake up in the morning feeling flatter than a flopped sponge cake. And there would be unlikely to be a single raising agent in the entire world to lift me out of my oppression if that were the case. I chuckled, unable to suppress the laughter that spontaneously tumbled out of my lips. The one thing I'd never been a single day in my life was remotely superstitious, and as for believing in haunted places, please credit with me with some intelligence. The idea was completely ridiculous. Everybody knew once you were dead, you were dead. Ghosts and that kind of thing were just legends. People's desire to believe we come back after we die to haunt the living. The idea was ludicrously insane as far as I was concerned.
"You're laughing at me, ma'am," said the young man, looking affronted. "You find this funny, don't you? You don't believe a word I've told you."
The name is Madison. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. It's just hard for me to swallow what you're saying. It's just I don't believe in that kind of stuff, but it doesn't mean it's not true, I said hastily, trying to appease the young man. It's just, I know you believe these Gremlins woods are, sinister and rather creepy. But could it not just be your imagination playing tricks on you, making you believe something's there when it's not really there at all?"
"You don't believe me, ma'am. That's blindingly obvious," said the teenager, raising a brow. "I'm not surprised, really. Townsfolk such as yourself never believe in this kind of stuff. They're so caught up in living in a concrete jungle. They're removed from the real world. I knew one lad from a town. He came to stay with us. He practically jumped out of his skin when he saw a centipede rolling across the grass. He'd never seen such a thing a day in his life. That was how far removed from nature he was. It shocked me, it did. I think city folk only believe what they see with their naked eyes. And you're the same, I suspect. And I don't mean that unkindly."
"It's not that," I said defensively. "If you must know, I went on a haunted bus trip once with a friend of mine. With an open mind, of course. She was really into that kind of thing. I hasten to say we saw absolutely nothing. We were given dowsing rods, we visited a cemetery, a few haunted locations. My friend returned home bitterly disappointed that she hadn't seen a single thing. I returned home more certain that these things do not exist at all. That's why we never saw anything."
"It's easy for you to say, ma'am, when you don't know what you're talking about. I was like you once, very cynical. I was pretty dismissive about my dad's account, even though my dad would not know how to lie. Things changed significantly for me when I started cleaning the Pearson swimming pool on the property, opposite the pool house, because as you would expect, with any pool house, you overlook a pool. Anyway, the Gremlins woods fringe the borders of the swimming pool area, rather like a sizable hedge. They're hideously overgrown, I'm afraid, because no one ever wants to go in there to thin them out, and the Pearsons stay far away from the place. Let's just say I never physically saw anything, ma'am. But when I was removing leaves from the swimming pool's surface, I heard strange things coming from those woods. Strange noises. I knew something was in there watching me. Every time I went and cleaned the pool, I got the same ominous feeling. Something is in those woods, ma'am, and whatever it is not good. In fact, it's very, very evil. You can ask the Pearsons yourself, if you like, about the strange screaming they sometimes hear at night coming from the woods. The sounds are terrifying. It sounds like a woman being murdered. I'm telling you, ma'am, the Gremlins woods are haunted. I never dare go near them if I can possibly help it. It doesn't help that they're hideously overgrown, as I keep saying. So you can get your foot snagged by all manner of vegetation, creeping vines, knotted roots, that kind of thing.
So you think something was watching you from the woods while you were cleaning leaves and stuff from the pool? Is that what you're saying? I asked.
I don't think someone was watching me, ma'am. I absolutely know it. Sometimes, ma'am, you know when you're being watched. There is no worse feeling in the world, let me tell you, because you're powerless to do anything about it. But when I say I was watched, I know I was being watched."
How do you know someone homeless isn't living in the woods? Keeping his beady eyes on you, perhaps? It's always a possibility, I said. I mean, you hear of homeless people living by the creek in the woods, hitching a tent, washing their clothes by a nearby stream. I used to hike a lot and saw that kind of stuff regularly. Once I saw a king-size mattress in the woods. Someone was clearly sleeping in it. It was really sad.
"I very much doubt that there is a homeless man living in the woods, ma'am. If you're homeless, I don't think you'd want to sleep in the Gremlins' woods. If you were paid $1 million to do so. I know I wouldn't. Neither would my father. If you don't believe me about the woods, you can go and visit my father. He'll tell you all you need to know about them. But don't tell him you caught me smoking. He'll have my guts for garters, and I'm not kidding either, which is a bit hypocritical because he smokes himself. But he has no faith in the commercial brands like Marlboro, which is what I smoke. Anyway, getting back to the Gremlins' woods. Frightening things go on in there, ma'am. So make sure you never go in there," he said, his eyes widening. "I'm warning you, ma'am. Those woods are considered haunted, and it's not for nothing. I have to summon up the courage to go to the pool house myself during the day, to keep the pool clean when I do it. I'm just saying you need to have your wits about you, ma'am. And whatever you do, don't leave the pool house during the night, no matter what. Just stay in the pool house until the morning. That's the best advice I can offer you."
Well, thank you, young man, for all the advice. Sorry I didn't ask your name. How rude of me.
"My name's Huck, ma'am, short for Huckleberry. My father's name is Golly. His parents called him Goliath when he was born, after that horrible giant that was slayed by King David in the Bible. They called him that because he was a big, big baby, but he hated being teased at school because of his name. So since then he shortened it to Golly."
I see. And what is your surname, then?
"Dressler. And you, ma'am? What's your name? You did say Madison, is that right?"
Yes, Madison. Madison McNally.
"Sounds Scottish, ma'am."
That's right. My father was originally from Scotland.
"Cool," said Huck. "I've always wanted to go to Scotland. So let's get moving, shall we, Madison? I'll show you the way to Red Vine Manor. Just follow me on the bike, will you? If I stand here, I'll talk all day, and Mrs. Pearson will wonder what has become of me. The good news is the manor is not far from here, but if you don't know it's there, you will surely miss it. The path through the trees is very ambiguous."
Well, I do need to go to the manor itself to pick up the key from Mrs. Pearson, I told him. That's what I was told to do by Mr. Crouch.
"Just follow me. I'll take you straight to the manor house. I'm going there myself anyway,"
said Huck, gathering up his bike and cycling ahead of me down the road. I reduced my speed to a snail's pace to follow him. Thank God I'd bumped into the teenager, or I really would be lost by now. But what he'd revealed to me left me with a rather disjointed, disquieted feeling. Could it really be that the Gremlins' woods were as bad as he described them to be? And the pool house overlooked the legendary woods. And that was where I was going to stay for the long term. I'd sensed a genuine fear in Huck's eyes at the very mention of the formidable place. He really seemed to believe there was something dangerous lurking among the trees in the Gremlins' woods. There was no doubt. Huck was right. Country folk were very different to city folk. I may have grown up in the countryside with Granny Doris, but people in those parts were not as superstitious as they were around here, if Huck was anything to go by. If Granny Doris had heard what Huck had just told me, she'd have taken it with a pinch of salt, and laughed out loud about how ridiculous it all was. I would be wise to do the same, but there was something about what he'd said to me that really left me feeling very perturbed. Huck was right. I would have easily missed the driveway that led through the trees. It was so obscure, I barely noticed it at all, and there was no signpost that was clearly marked Red Vine Manor, visible from the road. How was anybody ever expected to find this place? Unless they were superhuman, of course, and had a GPS that miraculously worked and received connection. My car steadily came to a fork in the road, with two signs, one with an arrow pointing straight ahead to Red Vine Manor House, and another to Red Vine Pool House. I continued to drive up the main road, which led to the beautiful manor house, a stunning red brick 2-story Georgian-looking affair that looked as grand as it probably would have been back in its day. I've always found red brick mansions have a long shelf life. Let's just say you can't go wrong with the ageless charm of classic architecture, as it seemingly never dates. A grandiose arched doorway framed the electric blue front door, and it immediately captured my attention. If I owned a property like Mr. Crouch did, I'd also never want to sell the place. It was absolutely charming, and the prepossessing yard, with its green, perfectly manicured grass, pretty beds of roses and perennials, neatly trimmed hedges, and terracotta pots tumbling over with pink and red blossoming geraniums, complemented by charming cascades of blue and white lobelia, was a delight to behold. What was there not to like about this beautiful place? There was another arrow with a sign that read Red Vine Stables. I guess that was where Huck spent most of his day, if he was a groom. On the right-hand side of the house I could see a wooden fenced enclosure, stretching out over a wide, sizable distance that boasted an extensive area of pristine pasture, where I happily observed several stunning-looking horses, some that were thoroughbreds, frolicking around, with chestnut coats glistening in the morning sun. What a fabulously beautiful day it was! I'd barely noticed it in my haste to find this place. Huck was parking his bicycle against a tall oak tree that stood proudly against the left-hand side of the house, casting shaded shadows over the red-bricked walls. He marched over towards me with a big smile on his face.
"We're here," he said to me. "Did I not tell you finding this place wouldn't be easy? You can barely notice it from the road."
I leaned out of my car window and grinned. "Thanks, Huck. I really appreciate your help. If it weren't for you, I'd still be driving around in circles."
"No problem," he said. "Glad to have been able to help."
My car was squatting like a big fat black rose beetle on the driveway, but before I could get out of it, the electric blue front door flung open, and a woman sporting a pair of jodhpurs and leather riding boots came trotting out of the house. Her short blonde cropped hair framed her attractive-looking face. There was a scant feathering of fine lines around her blue eyes that gave her age away. When she saw me, her face broke out into a warm smile of near-perfect white teeth. She stretched out a hand to me. I shook her hand, which was surprisingly firm, and returned the smile, although mine was a lot more reticent.
"I've been expecting you," she said. "You must be Madison. Ivan Crouch has told me all about you. I understand you desire to live in our pool house, and it's our pleasure to invite you to stay here. A friend of Ivan's is always a friend of ours, and you are so welcome. My husband Monty went to school with Ivan, you know, in this very area, so they've known each other for many years. Ivan was my husband's best man at our wedding, years ago, so we go back a long way, you know."
Before I could answer, Huck piped,
"You might be interested in giving Madison the cleaning job, Mrs. Pearson. She says she's strapped for cash and is looking for work." "Is that right?" said Mrs. Pearson. "Goodness gracious me, and to think I nearly advertised for a cleaner when I was in town the other day. Are you really interested in the job?" she asked me, skimming her eyes curiously over me. "I will pay very well. Anyone interested in cleaning deserves to be paid well as far as I'm concerned. It's not a job for the faint-hearted, let me tell you, especially not in my house, as I'm inclined to be a little slapdash about my housekeeping. And I dare say Monty would appreciate returning to the house looking a little ordered for a welcome change. I have to say, to all intensive purposes, if you're living here on the Red Vine estate, Madison, and took up the cleaning job here at the house, it would make things significantly easier for me. Are you really interested in a cleaning job?" she asked rather gingerly, as if she couldn't believe that that was possible. "Yes, I am," I said. "I can't profess to be the best cleaner in the world, but I'll do my best. But the money will come in handy. So if you're offering, I'm seriously interested. I was going to look for a waitressing job in town, but I'd be happy to clean instead.
A job is a job, as they say." Mrs. Pearson chuckled happily.
"I'm sure I will pay you a lot better, Madison, than a waitressing job would. Whatever you do in terms of cleaning will be a lot better than myself. You can ask Huck. I spend all day with the horses, and cleaning is something I avoid doing whenever possible. So you will do very nicely helping me around the house. Monty is always complaining that I'm no domestic goddess. He thinks I spend far too much time with our horses. I dare say he would thoroughly enjoy to return to the home one day to find the dishes in the kitchen sink have actually been washed."
"Where is your husband?" I asked curiously.
"Oh, Monty. He's an attorney. He works in town. And while he's out and about, I spend most of my time with my horses and with Huck over here. He helps me take care of them. He's our groom. It's a full-time job, believe me. Isn't it, Huck? Horses are hard work, that's for sure, but I love them and would never be without them. It sure is hard work, but I love it as well. Now you come in, Madison. Have some coffee with me. I'll give you the keys to the pool house, and you can get yourself all nicely settled in. You're welcome to start your cleaning job whenever you like. That's entirely up to you, but consider yourself hired. You can decide your own schedule and how many days you would like to work. You could work here every day or a few days. It's up to you. Around here, I'm very laid back and carefree. I believe in living a stress-free life, and I highly recommend it.
Thank you, Mrs. Pearson. I appreciate everything you're doing, and especially for letting me stay at the pool house. You have no idea how grateful I am.
Oh, goodness gracious, don't call me Mrs. Pearson, Madison. That makes me feel very old. Just call me Frances, she said, waving her arm dismissively. To tell you the truth, I'm very grateful someone will be using the pool house. It's such a waste to have a contained flatlet like that nobody is using. But me and my husband Monty don't swim, you see, so the pool house is wasted on us. We're not the sort of people to enjoy pool parties like some folk do. Barbecues, yes, but I have those out here on the porch, not a long distance away from the house. So it's easy access from the kitchen, if you know what I mean.
I settled down at the pool house on the Red Vine estate very seamlessly. I began working for the Pearsons and helping Frances with all the cooking and cleaning. Pretty soon I became indispensable in their lives, even if I say so myself. It really felt marvellously good to be so needed, and I dare say Mrs. Pearson became a maternal figure in my life. I found with her that I could open up about anything, and she was not offended by anything I said, unlike some people I've met over the years, who feign shock when you dare say anything politically incorrect. Mrs. Pearson insisted I called her Frances. She was the untidy person she had described, but in a funny kind of way her nonchalant insouciance towards housework I found endearing. The house wasn't dirty, so to speak, just rather chaotic. She'd leave stuff lying all over the place, coats slung haphazardly over chairs, shoes lying awkwardly in the hallway, to trip people up if they didn't watch where they were going, and all manner of dirty pots and pans were left marinating in the kitchen sink, soaking in soapy water that had long since turned cold, that Frances seemed to think would magically wash themselves. I rather suspected that poor Monty took over some of those household chores when he returned home from the office. It was no wonder they were looking for a cleaner, and I was glad to fulfil the role. Frances lived and breathed horses, devoting so much time and attention out of doors, where she spent the mainstay of her day, cleaning the stables, feeding and riding the horses with Huck. And she wasn't wrong. It really was a full-time job. I noticed when she came back into the house after days spent with the horses, her cheeks were always rosily flushed. Her silver blue eyes would sparkle with contentment. She looked the perfect picture of someone who found her calling in life, and I envied her for that. Would I ever look as happy as she did if I enrolled in a fine arts degree? I wasn't sure I would. I really enjoyed working for the Pearsons. Frances made me feel so warmly welcome, and for the first time in a long time I really felt as if I belonged in a family, as Mrs. Pearson treated me like the daughter she had never had. She told me she had 3 sons, all living in Boston. She'd never had a daughter, which was something she'd always regretted.
I always wanted a baby girl, but it just wasn't to be. I had 3 boys, one after the other, and by the time I'd had the 3rd boy, I was so exhausted. Monty wanted me to try for another baby, but I completely refused. He has no idea how dreadful it was to be pregnant. That was quite enough for me. And, of course, we decided that was it. 3 was enough. On top of it all my sons studied law at university. They've taken after their father in that regard. They have no interest in horses like I do, which is a dreadful shame. I'm just glad that Huck adores horses. So having you and Huck around here at Red Vine Manor is such a delight. You both help me manage the place so well while my husband is out working. It really is a dream come true. Thanks to your magical touch, Madison, the house is shining like a new pin. And I'm grateful for that. But better still, it is nice to have life around the place again. You wouldn't believe how desperately lonely it was for me when my children went off to Boston University. And now, of course, they live in Boston. The place felt dead for a long time without them around. But with you and Huck and the horses on the premises, everything has come back to life again. And then again, it's just so nice to know that the pool house itself is occupied. I hope you can make use of the pool, Madison, when the weather gets seasonably warmer. You do swim, don't you?
Yes, I swim. I love swimming as it happens. I can't wait to start using the pool.
You love swimming, said Frances, throwing her hands up in the air in delight. Oh, I am so pleased to hear that, she cooed. So pleased indeed. I get Huck to clean the pool out regularly, you know. Sometimes I think he was doing all that work for nothing. Now you come along and are going to make use of the pool. That is great news. Monty was thinking we should turn the pool into a pond, as it would be so much more manageable. But then I'm not sure Mr. Crouch would be agreeable to that. I think my husband fancied having a few koi carp around. I'm sure Huck doesn't like cleaning the swimming pool for some reason. Maybe he thinks it's a complete waste of time, throwing chlorine into the water and removing leaves from its surfaces when no one is using the pool. But now he's got nothing to complain about, has he? In winter we keep the pool covered with that plastic pool cover. But now spring is here, the covers have been removed, so hopefully you'll be swimming shortly.
Did Huck tell you the real reason why he doesn't like cleaning the pool out? I asked Frances rather coyly.
Well, I can't blame him, can you? I assume it's because no one has been using the pool, said Frances matter-of-factly. I would be rather begrudging myself about cleaning out something, for no good reason at all, wouldn't you? Keeping the pool clean is a full-time job. And it's purely cosmetic, with no one to enjoy it.
It's not that, I told Frances. Huck tells me there's something sinister in the woods, watching him while he cleans the pool. He says he knows something dangerous and horrible and evil is there. He says it creeps him out. I could see there was genuine fear in his eyes.
He told you that? Said Frances, looking bewildered. Well, I never.
Huck warned me to be very careful about the Gremlins Woods, especially as I'm living in the pool house and overlook the place. He says he's heard bad stories about those woods. His father, with 2 of his men that worked together as a team in his landscaping business, tried to cut down some trees for Mr. Crouch's father. But the men all bolted away from the woods. Huck believes something really bad happened to his father in there. Something so terrible that he refuses to talk about it. He told me to ask you about the place. He claims you've been witness to hearing some ear-piercing screams that sound as if a woman is being murdered in the woods. Huck said that I should pay his father a visit, but I've been rather reluctant to do so. For some reason, I don't want to hear what he has to say about the place. I'm not a believer in all that woo-woo stuff, and I don't want to start getting all paranoid now about something that probably isn't even true.
Goodness gracious me, said Frances. That does sound ominous. Well, I don't know what to say. I'm lost for words. Remind me never to talk to Huck's father about the Gremlins Woods. In my book, much like you, Madison dear, I think ignorance is bliss. There are some things I would really rather not know about. Me, I personally like to live a peaceful life. That's why I haven't got a clue what's going on in the world. I never ever listen to the news. I'm not surprised that Huck doesn't like the Gremlins Woods. I've never been kindly disposed towards them myself. They have a haunted, rather beleaguered look about them. And yes, it is true. Over the years, me and Monty have heard some harrowing sounds coming from those woods. It does sound ominously like a woman screaming, as if she's being murdered. That's a very good way to describe it, I would say. Let's just say it was enough to make my blood run cold. But I won't go near the place, that's for sure.
It does look rather spooky, I admitted. But then again, they are incredibly overgrown. Maybe if some of the vegetation was cleared away and the wood grove was thinned down a bit, it wouldn't look so unappealing.
It's very interesting you should say that, Madison, dear. Let's just say when we rented out the Red Vine Manor from your former landlord in Portland, Mr. Crouch, well, I hated those woods with a burning passion, for some unexplainable reason, but they scared me half to death, and I'm not exactly sure why, as I don't intimidate very easily. My horses were petrified of those woods, refused to go anywhere near the place, which I think speaks volumes. The weirdest conundrum of all is that I've never quite worked out why, when we didn't hire anyone to thin down those woods, for some reason they've been pretty well maintained over the years, much of the vegetation cleared away. By all accounts, it should look much more overgrown than it actually does. So that is one mystery I would rather not explore. I refuse to go into those woods from day one, and thankfully all the riding trails I've always taken are off this property. There's a lovely trail at the end of Riverside Road. Even my 2 teenage boys never went anywhere near the Gremlins Woods. They said it made them feel very uneasy. I do remember they went exploring them one day, when they were in their late teens, but came back with faces so white they were absolutely convinced that someone had been stalking them. Whether it was in their imaginations or not, I can't be sure. But much like Huck, they felt something was out there, and whatever it was, it didn't feel good. They felt as if someone wanted them to leave at once. Suffice to say, they never went back into those woods. And as for my husband, Monty, without wishing to sound mean, he is about as unathletic as a man can get. So he would have no interest at all in rambling around in the woods. As far as Monty is concerned, there is nothing wrong with the Gremlins Woods. But then again, what would he know? He's never even been in there. He'd never indulge himself with fanciful thoughts that the place could be haunted or outer-worldly. He's not wired to think that way, you see. I even think if he saw a green goblin running around our backyard, I swear he would convince himself he'd imagined it all. I laughed as I thought about Frances's well-to-do husband Monty, who certainly was the antithesis of Frances in every way. If he observed a green goblin in the backyard, Frances was absolutely right. Even if he physically saw it with his own eyes, a man like Monty would never believe what he'd seen for a single second. He'd put it down to the beer he'd been drinking, or a trick of the light, something like that. Frances continued, I've never felt like I was being watched from the Gremlins Woods, like my children always did. Monty, of course, told them they were being utterly ridiculous. But then again, that dreadful husband of mine has absolutely no imagination. It didn't help, of course, that when my children were young, they were very aggrieved about the story about the 2 sisters in the 1800s that disappeared in the Gremlins Woods. It was hardly a surprise they never wanted to play around there. And it was only when they were in their late teens that they decided to venture in there. And then they had that experience of being watched and followed. So never again. But I have to say, when it comes to those 2 sisters in the 1800s that disappeared into thin air when they went into the Gremlins Woods, well, they're never very far away from my thoughts. I do often wonder what happened to them. I mean, how do you just disappear like that? It was such a tragic story, it really, really was.
So it's true then? I asked.
Of course it's a true story, love. And the reason I know it is because the man that picked up the two sisters and gave them a lift was Mr. Crouch's own father himself. He knows the story very well. Mr. Crouch was a little boy when it happened. And oh, what a story. I understand Mr. Crouch Sr., who was Mr. Crouch's father, of course, was returning home to Red Vine Manor after playing a game of afternoon bridge with a very good friend of his. He observed two young women come dashing out of the Gremlin's woods onto the road. He was concerned because it was getting dark. He wasn't remotely happy about seeing two young ladies walking around on their own down a sequestered country road, when the light was beginning to dim. They waved him down because he was in a car at the time, and asked him if he minded taking them into the town. He agreed to give them a lift. He said that both the sisters wanted to sit in the back seat of his car. He heard them giggling contentedly together, as if they were sharing an amusing joke. At one point he glanced through the visor mirror. He wanted to ask the two ladies what they intended to do in town, just to make polite conversation. Then, to his horror, he noticed that nobody was actually sitting there. The girls had vanished. He was so freaked out, he hightailed it back to Red Vine Manor House in his car. Apparently, Mr. Crouch said his father looked as white as a sheet and was physically trembling like a jelly. It took a while for his wife to calm him down. In the end, she gave him a few shots of the finest Scotch whisky money can buy. He told his wife he was absolutely certain he may have picked up the two girls that had gone missing in the 1800s. They had run out of the Gremlin's woods, and he was certain he'd seen their ghosts. He did some research into the matter about the two sisters. And then he's discovered, to his astonishment, that the photographs matched with the woman he'd actually seen. It gave him quite the fright, it did. Unfortunately, Mr. Crouch's father did not pay much attention to the girls' attire, but he does believe they were wearing 1800s clothes.
Goodness gracious me, that is some story. Mr. Crouch's father must have been freaked out. I know I would have been if that had happened to me. It would give me the chills, that's for sure.
Well, he was freaked out. That's an understatement. And you know, he was a very practical, down-to-earth man, much like Mr. Crouch is. He didn't believe in outer-worldly things. So when this experience happened to him, it shook him to the core, I believe. So let's just say, when Huck says strange things have happened in the Gremlin's woods, he's not wrong about that. This part of the world is notorious for strange goings-on and happenings, so I've been told. There have been reports of strange animals seen in these parts that are nothing like the natural wildlife we tend to get around here. One man was convinced he'd seen a white cougar that was absolutely enormous. He said it was the oddest sighting that he'd ever seen. If Huck thinks something is watching him from the woods when cleaning the pool, well, I don't know what to say about that. Huck is not a paranoid person, so for him to say that does give me pause for thought.
Frances turned around to me with a look of disquiet on her face.
You haven't experienced anything untoward at the pool house, have you, Madison, dear? Because if in any way you feel uncomfortable living at the pool house, you could always move into the manor with me and Monty. We'd love to have you stay here as long as you like. There are so many rooms going spare in this house. You can live here forever if you like. I won't complain about that.
That's a generous offer, Frances, but don't worry about me. The pool house is absolutely amazing, Frances. I couldn't be happier there. It's in perfect condition, with sumptuous furnishings and all that. When I came here, I couldn't believe I was going to live in the lap of luxury. You have no idea how grateful I am to you and Monty. The place is absolutely perfect.
There is nothing to be grateful for, Madison, dear. Me and Monty are the ones that are indebted to you. It's the other way round. Look how you've worked like a Trojan around this house, completely transforming the place. It now does look like a silk purse. Monty has never been so happy since we employed you. He's enjoyed so many good meals that you've cooked. So delicious. I could never cook like that. But when you made that apple pie and cream, Monty was like putty in your hands, was he not? If Monty had his way, you would move in with us forever and ever, and make apple pie and cream for him every single day. And God knows how big the man would become. I dread to think of it.
I like Monty. He's a good man.
Believe it or not, I like him too, chuckled Francis. That's why I married the incorrigible man, even though he can be absolutely infuriating at times. We're completely opposite, are we not? Like chalk is to cheese. But then again, that's maybe why we get on so terribly well. The last thing I'd ever want is to be married to someone exactly like myself. Thank God Monty is so much more ordered than I am. Imagine how chaotic this place would have become if Monty was as messy and untidy as I am.
I can't imagine, I teased, giving Francis a wink. 2 weeks later. It was the first sunny day in early summer. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was happily relaxing in the pool house, reading a novel on the living room settee. I glanced out of the glass sliding doors and found my attention focused on the glistening water of the kidney-shaped swimming pool. I was thinking how inviting it all looked. I found myself warming to the idea of enjoying my first swim of the season. I mean, it really was a magnificently beautiful day, and the sunshine that trespassed through the sliding doors and dappled my face was agreeably warm. Huck had made the pool look absolutely perfect. He cleaned it fastidiously every single week. Let's just say, with the sun glistening on its bejewelled surface, the water looked like it was moving. Moments later I had changed into my swimming suit. I tested the water with my big toe before I bravely climbed into the pool and began to swim many laps. The water was slightly on the cool side, but nevertheless it was pleasantly invigorating. After I had finished my laps, I climbed out of the water, shivering a little from the cold, but I quickly towel-dried my body rather vigorously. I then lay back rather lackadaisically on the sun lounge on the swimming pool patio and began to bask in the sun, which I have to say was deliciously warm. I felt rather like a salamander, because I wanted to soak it all up. I knew 15 minutes in the sun was good for you, but I was aware of the dangers of too much sun exposure, so I didn't want to overdo it. I closed my eyes contentedly and woke up with a start when I heard something hitting the water with a powerful crash. What the hell was that, I thought, feeling ever so startled. I very nearly had jumped out of my skin. That was when I saw a stone lying at the bottom of the pool that was not there before. The swimming pool water was still rippled from the disturbing, powerful impact of the stone hitting the water. I was mystified and somewhat intrigued. Had someone thrown a stone into the water just to get my attention? But who on earth had done this? Were they trying to let me know they were watching me? What the hell, I thought. I studied the Gremlin's Woods very curiously, my eyes running through the wall of trees that fringed the pool like a large hedgerow, making the pool area appear very private, if you believe nothing was lurking in those trees clandestinely watching you, that is. I could not help but curiously wonder who had thrown a stone through the trees into the swimming pool. They had to be a very good shot to be able to do that, without being detected. After everything that Huck and Francis had told me about the Gremlin's Woods, far from putting me off from venturing into them, it had only stirred up my curiosity. I had never shared these intrepid daredevil thoughts of mine with Huck or with Francis, as I'm not sure they would have been impressed by such explorative ideas on my part. I had never believed in the paranormal, and even the story about the two sisters that had vanished in the 1800s after venturing into the Gremlin's Woods I had simply taken with a pinch of salt. I was wired to think a lot more like Francis's husband Monty in that regard. I always believed there was a practical explanation for everything. Far from being intimidated by the stone being flung into the swimming pool, I was impressed. This was possibly one of the most outlandish things that had ever happened to me to date. It demanded an explanation as far as I was concerned. I wanted to find out who or what had thrown the stone into the water. I was hungry for answers. It did, of course, cross my mind that Huck could be toying with me, but I didn't think it would be likely for him to pull a stunt like this on me, especially with his extreme aversion to the Gremlin's Woods. I went back into the pool house and threw on a pair of jeans and some sneakers. I decided that I was going to take a walk in those woods and debunk all those paranormal claims once and for all, and to put to rest some of those wild rumours that had circulated about this place over the centuries. I'd be able to tell Francis and Huck that their unsettled, disquieted fears about the place were likely all in their heads and had no bearing to reality whatsoever. If I could convince them of this, Huck might even consider clearing away some of the heavy-duty vegetation growing between the trees that had got a little out of hand. Before I had time to persuade myself otherwise, with any crawling misgivings, I found myself in the woods. It was heavily overgrown, as I suspected, but some of the paths were not that bad, although occasionally branches would indiscriminately scratch at me, tugging dispassionately at my clothes and hair. The ground was richly fertile, with the soil as black as molasses. Leaves were scattered liberally over the surface of the ground, and were quickly turning into mulch. Everything was so vividly green, from the leaves on the branches of the trees to the rambling foliage growing across the forest floor. I was struck by how beautiful it all was, despite how wild the woods had obviously become. I promptly forgot about Francis and Huck's suspicious reservations over the woods, for in my humble opinion there was nothing to fear. I daringly ventured deep into the woods. The paths opened up superbly, as if they'd been well maintained, which I did find oddly bizarre. There was no way the woods should look as ordered as this. It really was a conundrum to me. That was when I heard the giggles. It was the sound of two young women giggling. I was now in abject astonishment, because here in the middle of the woods, on the Red Vine property, where no one should be around, I had heard these female giggles. The worst part of it all was that I felt the giggles were directed at me, as if whoever was in my midst was actually having a laugh at my expense. It was a feeling like when you're a child and some mean children in the classroom are whispering in the corner and making fun of you behind your back. It felt exactly like that. The giggling persisted, making me think of the two ghostly sisters that had climbed into Mr. Crouch's father's car and promptly disappeared. They had emerged from the Gremlins woods onto a sequestered country road and accepted a lift from him. Could they be here now? Were they the ones laughing at me? Did their ghostly spectral figures haunt this woods and the sequestered country road beyond? I had never believed in such things, so why was I entertaining such preposterous, idiosyncratic thoughts? "Who's there?" I called out. "Is somebody there? Who's that?" The giggling stopped at once. Everything went airily quiet, and even the bird song stopped so sharply. The silence was deafening, almost more unnerving than the giggling had been. For a brief moment I wondered if I imagined it all, but then I heard the bothersome whispers, and let me tell you, there is nothing more discomposing than hearing whispering all about you. The whispering felt terribly personal, almost as if hundreds of invisible people were nastily whispering about me and saying all kinds of mean things. It was as if even the trees in the wood grove were conspiring against me and gossiping on my behalf behind my back, as if the Gremlins woods itself had turned against me and was desirous to spit me out like a rancid piece of old chewing gum. It was the most disingenuous, inauspicious feeling I have ever experienced. It was so profoundly disquieting. It made my skin crawl. All of a sudden my calm demeanour cruelly seemed to have been snatched away, rather like when a seagull steals your sandwich from you. In a trice I was fully consumed with an ominous sense of foreboding, a feeling of impending dread, the likes of such that I've never encountered before or since. Now I was tasting what it was really like to experience true, very, very raw fear. My first thought was I needed to get the hell out of the Gremlins woods. All I know is I became bewildered, confused and disorientated, almost as if my mind had lost its full sharpness, so that my clear thinking on my part had become as clouded and murky as the water in a pond impregnated by way too much algae. It felt as if someone other than myself had grabbed hold of my thoughts, because everything became so chaotically jumbled. How the hell was I going to get out of these woods? I couldn't even remember the path I'd taken to get in here. Why couldn't I remember it? This was absurdly crazy. Was I going stark raving mad? What on earth was wrong with me? Why was my memory so disjointed? I steadily began to panic as the rough-textured branches of the trees on my left-hand side began to shake and rattle rigorously, like a cheerleader's pom-poms, and that was when I knew that someone was watching me. I could feel a pair of iniquitous eyes burning into the back of my skull. There was nothing friendly about this creepy feeling that overcame me. I almost jumped out of my skin with trepidation.
when something began to shake the branches even more furiously. And for anyone to be able to do such a thing would mean they'd have to be powerfully strong. Whoever was doing this to the tree branches did not want me here under any circumstances. I could sense an indignant frustration in the air, as tangibly as if I was smelling wood smoke. In that moment, I tasted danger on my tongue, as the back of my throat was infused with a rank bitterness. It seeped down my esophagus into my stomach, so that my insides were beginning to spasm, recoil, and squirm. Something was definitely there. I knew it with every single fibre of my being, like I've never known anything before. Whatever it was hugely big, very dangerous, and it wanted me gone from this place. That much I knew with a pronounced sense of certainty. I just knew that I was in grievous danger, even if I couldn't physically see the threat. In a flustered state of panic, like a pigeon caught up in a cat's jaws, I studied the branches ever closer to see if I could observe someone standing there. The tree branches shuddered and shook, but nothing was in my line of vision. All of a sudden, in my peripheral vision, I caught sight of a shadowy impression of something enormously big, hiding among the branches. The figure was so vague and obscure I could barely see it. Whatever it was monstrously huge. "Get out of here!" a voice cried out in my head. "Get out of here!" It was the voice most likely of my higher consciousness, trying to direct me to safety. I know they say you should never run away when there's a predator around. My grandmother had told me that often enough. "Even if you're afraid, Madison dear," she had said, "walk away from the danger very slowly. If you ran, the predator will give you chase, and you don't want that." My grandmother's warning words were completely useless to me. I couldn't pay them any heed. At this specific moment, a hasty retreat was the only thought in my mind. I needed to get out of here as quickly as I possibly could. But I might as well have been running through a thick, blurry white fog, because that's how muddled my mind had become. I did the only thing I knew how to do to escape the formidable situation in which I found myself so cruelly entrenched. I began to run and run and run, my legs wobbling beneath me like an unsteady camping chair. I was sure they were going to give out on me, and I would crumble on the forest floor into a mangled heap. That was when I heard the treacherously indignant roar, and heavy thunderous feet giving me chase. My running had certainly made this predator, whatever it was, begin to pursue me. Would that have happened if I'd simply walked away calmly? I'm not so sure. I was too petrified to turn around to see what it was that was chasing me. I was far too afraid. I knew I couldn't unsee anything that I was to witness. Besides, I didn't have the luxury of time to glance over my shoulders, as that would cost me very, very important seconds that I simply could not afford to lose. My heart was galloping violently in my chest, as a frenzied wind seemed to whip up among the trees, so that the leaves began to rustle. I ran like I have never run before or since. I ran into tree branches that scratched me and tugged at my clothes. Sometimes the tugs of these branches were so powerful I almost lost my footing. Angry roots, burgeoning their way through the forest floor, threatened to trip me up at every second. But I ignored all nature's stumbling blocks, and ran through dead ends fringed by thorny briars and thick menacing vegetation that seemed hell-bent on bringing me to my knees. I scrambled awkwardly through a maze of endless trees, with branches that seemed to be like hands that wanted to grab me and throttle me. Every cell in my body was begging me to find the light, and that was when I heard the female giggles, and ran towards those giggles. And as I ran towards the giggles, the woodgrove magically opened out, and I saw the light of the day peering at me like an old friend. I could hear this monstrous thing behind me, grunting and heaving, its heavy feet hitting the ground so powerfully that the ground itself began to vibrate. Whatever was in keen pursuit of me was absolutely enormous. Of that I was in no doubt. Once I blasted through the trees, I found myself at the swimming pool. I didn't dare to even stop to draw breath. I didn't even take a fleeting second to glance at my pursuer. I just couldn't do it. Breathlessly I ran to the front door of the pool house that thankfully was not locked.
I didn't dare look behind me. I heard no footsteps pounding the ground, nor any more treacherously heavy breathing, which gave me a faint hope that maybe this thing was finally gone. I opened the door, locking myself very carefully into the pool house. It was here that I would feel safe, although safe is not really a word to describe my uncertainty at this particular point in time. For a brief second I dropped to the ground, my back against the front door, and I began to try and calm down my frantic breaths. Once they became more steady, I quickly rose to my feet. I dashed over to the floor-to-ceiling sliding doors from the living room area that overlooked the swimming pool, and I stared out towards the Gremlins woods. I wanted to see if I could see who or what it was that had given me chase. That was when I observed a great big rock flying into the air and landing into the swimming pool with a mighty, thunderous, angry plop. I felt as if this was a cryptic message for me, telling me to go nowhere near the Gremlins woods again. And then stepping from behind the trees, that was when I saw him. I think he showed himself to me, for I doubt I would have seen him had he not stepped away from the trees. So he definitely wanted me to see him. He stood there so formidably, with his powerful tree-trunk-sized legs straddled. There are no words to describe the sheer size of this hideous thing. He was gargantuan in every sense of the word, and was built as solidly as a brick shithouse. Excuse the awful language, but those are the only words I can use to describe the sheer density and size of this creature. I would say this humanoid creature, which I realized to my astonishment was a disagreeable Bigfoot, was the scariest, most terrifying thing I have ever beheld. The Bigfoot was easily 11 foot tall, with burly, muscular proportions. He was covered in long flowing dark hair, and his face was astonishingly human. The Bigfoot was swinging his arms around rather furiously. He slammed his fists directly on his chest and roared at me. Then he turned around and glided into the Gremlins woods. For a long time I almost hyperventilated, and finally I calmed down. I wondered what it was that I should do. Should I tell Frances what I had seen in the Gremlins woods? But then again she told me ignorance was bliss. If I told Huck I had been in the woodgrove, he would be very upset with me. Maybe he would think I was stirring up stuff. It would be wise not to mention this to him, I thought. But what about Huck's father, Golly? Short for Goliath his name was. Maybe he could tell me about the Gremlins woods. Yes, I would pay Huck's father a visit. I didn't feel threatened living at the pool house, but I didn't fancy swimming again after that rock had been thrown into the water, and I couldn't help but wonder if the Bigfoot imposed a threat to me. I needed to know if this was the case. Maybe Golly could give me some answers, and hopefully some sound advice. I could, of course, accept Frances's kind offer, and move into the Red Vine Manor house to live with her and Monty. And while that was an agreeable idea, I really liked my independence at the pool house. No, I decided, I'd go and visit Golly in the morning. 2 days later, it was a nightmare trying to locate where Golly lived. I had meant to go and visit the man the morning after my Bigfoot experience, but I was still shaking like a leaf from the post-traumatic after-effects of my encounter. Frances had thought I'd come down with flu and insisted I stayed in bed for the next 48 hours, which I had done so gladly, until I could summon up the strength and energy to finally face my demons. The best way to do this was to pay Golly a visit. If Golly thought I was in danger living at the pool house, then I really would have to reconsider whether I should move in with Frances and Monty. Luckily, Huck had given me good directions. "You're going to see my dad?" he asked. "I am indeed," I told him coyly. Huck studied me curiously. "Have you seen anything strange in the Gremlins woods?" "You have, haven't you? I know you have. Or why this sudden interest in seeing my father all of a sudden?" I inwardly grimaced. Huck was so intuitive and perceptive. He was reading me like an open book. "Nothing like that," I lied, hoping that I was successfully fooling him. "I'm just curious about what your father has to say about the woods. I thought I'd pay him a visit, that's all. It's been a visit long time overdue, you could say." Huck looked almost disappointed. Maybe he wanted me to affirm his own suspicions of feeling watched when he was cleaning the pool at the pool house, as everybody likes to feel validated, don't they? But I chose to give nothing away. When you've had an outlandish, rather paradoxical encounter, such as my own, Who on earth do you talk to about such things? For some reason I was not willing to share what had happened to me in the Gremlin's woods. Not with Monty, not with Francis, and not with Huck. I hoped I'd have the courage to talk to Golly about what had happened to me. As I thought from the sounds of things, he was the one person who'd be open-minded to believe my story and offer me some salient advice, even though I'd never met the man.
"Well, I'm just warning you," said Huck. "Listening to what my father has to say about the Gremlin's woods might be disquieting and disturbing for you, to such an extent that you might actually feel uncomfortable remaining in the pool house."
"Don't worry about me. I'm not superstitious like you, Huck," I said with a cheesy grin. I didn't want him to know that after my paradoxical encounter with the Bigfoot, my view of reality had significantly shifted. A few days ago, I would have laughed in Huck's face if he had suggested that such creatures were actually real. Now everything I thought I knew had become so distorted. I managed to find the faint squiggle of a narrow pathway through the trees, the signpost leading to Golly's cabin, which was so ambiguously obscure I almost missed it. Why was everything in this part of the world so badly marked and almost close to impossible to actually find? The signpost looked so decrepit and time-worn, like an old man standing on tired legs that were crumbling beneath him. The signpost was rudimentary and about as basic as you could get. It stood up on a cross-shaped piece of timber. The painted words Holloway Peak were so faint they were barely discernible. At least I'd found the place, which was all that mattered. I drove rather noisily up the driveway through the trees that was rudely littered with a plethora of pebbles that pinged against the undercarriage of my car. There were some muddy pools of water from overnight rain we had enjoyed that sloshed under my tyres and bespeckled my windscreen with droplets of brown mud. I parked my car next to a very big, ugly tank-sized SUV that looked as if it had enjoyed a recent roll in the mud. Someone had put a sign in the dust on the windscreen which read, "Clean me." The car made me believe at once that Golly must be at home. I smiled in amusement to myself. The writing looked suspiciously like Huck's. I think he was surreptitiously trying to tell his father in no uncertain terms to give his SUV a much-needed wash, which actually would be a good idea. I was sure the front door would suddenly fly open, and that I would see an older version of Huck himself standing in the doorway of the cabin. Probably a man with wild blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, whose features were probably very faded and tired-looking. But no one came to the door, so I shuffled out of my car rather awkwardly. The ground outside the cabin was so muddy. There were tire tracks imprinted in the ground, so it was a laborious struggle navigating my way over the dried clumps of mud. I could hear the sound of water babbling away in a nearby creek, which the cabin overlooked. I walked to the wraparound porch where a few rather shabby stairs led to the front door. I was greeted by a few clucking free-range hens that wandered around the front yard, pecking away happily at the ground. When they saw me, they scattered away, clucking furiously and flapping their wings, as if my intrusion had unsettled them greatly. I approached what looked like a half-open front door. I noticed a contented-looking tortoise-shell tabby lying lackadaisically across the upholstered wicker chair, soaking up the morning sun appreciatively. He immediately purred when I approached him, studying me curiously through his yellow eyes. I could not resist in giving him a good scratch under the chin. The cat's purrs intensified, and he rolled on his side, stretching out his body. Golly Tussler lived in an old wooden cabin, next to a couple of more modern outbuildings that looked rather shabby and run down, as if the whole place could have done with a makeover. There was an open carport that was littered with all kinds of rusted old dilapidated-looking farming machinery that looked like it was so ancient it probably belonged in a museum, and had no earthly use whatsoever, unless of course you came from another time. I wondered what would possess the man to hold on to so much stuff. Maybe there was a degree of nostalgia attached to many of these things that Golly owned. Possibly they had belonged to long-since-deceased family members, which was why he was keeping them. Huck had mentioned his family had lived in this area for many generations, so his father knew the legends about this place. The cabin itself could have easily accommodated a family of 6 people. It was sizable enough for that, but at the same time rather simplistic, like an old miner's cabin. but it overlooked a prepossessing creek that glistened like silver in the morning sun, catching all the reflections of the sky and the trees on its mirror-like surface. It would seem all manner of willows, with their leafy green boughs tumbled over into the water, as if the trees themselves were slightly stooped or lopsided in posture. There were so many birds tweeting among the branches, some carrying grasses in their beaks, which suggested that they were industriously making nests among the willow trees. I could see a couple of men's shirts drying on the balustrades, as if they'd only just been washed. I walked up the steps rather cautiously, and began to knock at the door ever so gingerly, but there was no response, so I knocked again, and nearly jumped out of my skin, when Golly approached me from behind, walking up the steps, carrying in his hands a basket of firewood. He caught me red-handed, scratching his tortoiseshell tabby under the chin.
"Careful," he chuckled. "You've been warned. If you carry on massaging Gypsy like that, she's going to want to go home with you and have nothing more to do with me. The cat loves being massaged."
Following Golly up the stairs was a very well-behaved black and white sheepdog, which I learnt was called Major, who studied me curiously through dark eyes, and waved his tail at me.
"Sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to startle you like this. Huck was telling me you were going to pay me a visit. You must be Madison. You're working for the Pearsons, I believe, and I understand you're living at the pool house that overlooks the Gremlins woods."
"Yes, that's right," I said.
"Do come in," said
Golly, giving me a welcoming smile, beckoning for me to go ahead of him in the doorway, which I did with Major trotting obediently behind me.
"You must excuse the mess, ma'am. I'm rather embarrassed about it. Huck did tell me you would be dropping by, and I did mean to clean up before you came, but I never got around to it. I'm afraid we have no woman around the place to keep us in check, and we need a woman to do that. The only thing Huck will keep fastidiously tidy is the stables at Red Vine Manor, for Francis Pearson. But here it always looks like a hurricane has hit the cabin, most days of the week, I'm afraid."
"Don't worry, I'm rather used to untidy people," I chuckled. "You can't possibly be worse than Frances Pearson. She knows how to throw her stuff around indiscriminately, let me tell you."
Golly chuckled. "I like Frances Pearson very much. A jolly good woman she is. I know Huck is very attached to her. She's the quintessential maternal figure in his life, I suspect."
I don't know what I was expecting Golly to look like, but he was nothing like I envisaged him to be. He had a long white Father Christmas-like beard, very pale blue but piercing eyes that were framed by bushy white eyebrows. He wore a bright orange and white bandana on his head, but he was a much untidier version of Huck, you could say. I could tell his leathery olive skin had taken a beating from the weather and was prematurely aged. I suspected that Golly was older than he actually looked, but that's what working out of doors can do to the complexion. Golly stood up as straight as a pencil. There was no stoop or slouch in his posture, no slump in his stature. He was over 6 foot tall and was incredibly well built, with tattoos on his arms that he showed off in his T-shirt. I knew this man had never been to a gym a single day in his life, and yet he could probably outperform any of those gym junkies you see around who spend countless hours at the gym trying to perfect their appearance. This man looked strong effortlessly. But if you've been felling trees most of your life, you're bound to be in excellent shape and tip-top condition. Golly wasn't joking about the mess around the place, or the lack of feminine influences in the cabin. He and his son living together were rather like a couple of scruffy students in a digs who didn't care about how sloppy they were. It was almost instinctive for me to want to clear away some of their mess for them, but I resisted the temptation. Jackets and shirts were haphazardly thrown over chairs and furniture, but the place was not remotely dusty or dirty, just messy. I was pleasantly surprised to see in the tiny kitchen that everything was neatly washed up and put away, so at least the 2 men didn't live like slobs. I had learned from Huck that his mother had left Golly many years ago, leaving Huck in his charge, and they'd never heard from her since. Huck informed me he wasn't bitter towards his mother, who had made no secret of the fact that she had never been remotely maternal, but it would have been nice if she had been involved in his life, he had admitted to me.
"My dad told me that he only got married to my mother because she became pregnant with me. She had never wanted to have any children, but my father persuaded her to keep me, Finally she agreed. Unfortunately, my parents had very little in common with each other. My mother was much more social than my father, loved going out and painting the town red, so to speak, while my father was a quiet, reserved, solitary kind of person who enjoyed the great outdoors and spending lots of time on his own. I guess she hated that about him. One day she told my father, "I'm leaving because I'm so bored. I'm bored to death being married to you, golly. You were the one that wanted kids, so you can keep Huck." And then she was gone just like that, out of our lives, without ever looking back. She never sent me so much as a postcard, he had admitted. I looked into Huck's eyes, and although I could sense he was hurt, he was accepting of his mother's apathetic insouciance towards him, almost as if it was a fact of life. Huck was a well-rounded young man, but I suspect Frances Pearson was indeed like a mother to him. I felt she was that way towards me as well. So me and Huck had something in common in that regard. We were probably both subconsciously looking for a maternal figure in our lives, and I guess Frances Pearson fitted the bill superbly for the both of us. "Would you like some tea?" asked Golly. "I would offer you coffee, but I can't stand the stuff," he said, making an appalled face. "I don't get why people are fixated on drinking coffee. I find it completely unpalatable." "I love coffee," I said. "It gives me the kick-start in the morning I need. Otherwise I tend to be rather sluggish all day. But if you haven't got coffee, it doesn't matter. Tea will do fine." "Coming up," said Golly, gathering a kettle and putting it on a gas hob. As he prepared the tea, he asked me if I'd like a bit of brandy in mine. "No thanks," I said. "I hope you don't mind if I have a touch of brandy in my tea. I've got a feeling I'm going to need it," he told me. "If we're going to be talking about the Gremlins Woods, that is." "Be my guest," I said. He beckoned for me to sit down on a couch in the small living area. But before I sat down, he removed a pile of clothes lying across the chair and threw them into what looked like a linen basket in the far corner of the room. He handed me a mug of tea and sat down on the small sofa opposite me. Major jumped up onto the couch and rested his head on Golly's legs. His dark eyes continued to watch me curiously. For a while nothing was said, as we both took sips of tea. Mine was particularly good, and I said as much. "You make an excellent cup of tea, Golly. What's your secret?" "It's all in the brewing," said Golly. "I leave the tea to stand for a couple of minutes. That's when you get all the flavour from the tea. You can't just throw a tea bag into water and expect it to taste good. It needs some time to marinate, and then it will taste very good indeed." "Well, that makes sense to me," I said. "I make tea and I'm afraid I remove the bag too quickly. Maybe that's why I don't enjoy it." "Well, no wonder your tea tastes insipid," said Golly. "Ah, that's better," he said, rubbing his stomach. "When I have some brandy in the tea, the whole body just warms up. So tell me, Madison, what made you move to this part of the world, if you don't mind my asking?" "It wasn't through any personal choice. It was a question of finding a roof over my head, so to speak. I was pretty much homeless at the time, and Mr. Crouch was my old landlord. He owned Red Vine Manor and rented it out to the Pearsons, so he asked them if they minded if I moved into the pool house. They were very amenable, and so that's what happened." "Yes, I know all about that. Huck tells me you're from Portland. He's told me quite a lot about you." "All good, I hope," I teased. Golly chuckled. "I'll let you into a little secret, shall I, Madison? I think that Huck is very chuffed you've moved into the Red Vine property. It's very nice for him to have the young feminine energy around, because he was deprived so much of it growing up. You are a few years older than him, of course, but I think he's been starved of female role models in his life, so I think he sees you as a sister figure, and Frances Pearson as the mother that he's never had. I know my Huck is very fond of you." "Well, we do have a great friendship," I admitted. "I am very fond of him. I'm very sorry to hear about your wife, Golly, leaving you in the lurch like that all those years ago. It couldn't have been easy for you to raise Huck all on your own like that. I really commend you for doing it." "Well, at least he turned out all right, didn't he?" said Golly, giving me an amused wink. "He's a good lad, is Huck." "Well, Huck is one of the most well-balanced teenagers I've ever met. He's a credit to you, Golly." "No thanks to his mother. said Golly, shaking his head. "I knew when I married that woman that she was selfish and self-centered, but not even sending her son a single birthday card over all these years. Well, that's nothing short of disgusting. She always was a cold fish, was Hilda."
"But how do you know she doesn't want anything to do with Huck?" I asked. "She could have changed over the years. People do, you know." Golly let out a huge snort.
"Hilda wouldn't change for anyone. I got a private investigator to try and locate her whereabouts about 5 years ago. I contacted her myself and told her it would be very nice if she had some kind of relationship with her son. She told me to get lost. She wasn't interested in getting to know Huck. She told me that that was the part of her life she wanted to desperately forget. So there you have it. The woman has a heart of ice."
"That is so sad," I said. "But I suppose life can be complicated, can it not?"
"You're not wrong about that, Madison. So tell me, what is the real reason you came here today? I know you want to know about the Gremlin's Woods, but there's more to your visit than that. I've got a feeling that something happened to you, connected to those woods. Otherwise, I'm not sure you would be paying me a visit now. Huck told me you were rather intrigued about the woods. But if you were so curious, would you not have visited me a long time ago? So why now, all of a sudden?"
Much like Huck, it would seem that Golly was as sharp as a hawk. He was not a man who suffered fools gladly, and you couldn't pull the wool over his eyes very easily. So why even bother trying? "You've got me, Golly," I said, twisting my fingers nervously and weaving them between my hands, a nervous habit that I picked up when I became reluctant to talk. I knew I needed to tell Golly about the Bigfoot that had chased me out of the Gremlin's Woods. I wondered if he would believe my bizarre account, but he didn't flinch when I told him my story. He simply nodded his head, as if he wholeheartedly believed me, and asked me if I minded if he smoked.
"It calms me down," he said. "I don't like my Huck to smoke, so I'm a bit of a hypocrite, I have to say. But I don't want him to get into the habit, because it's very difficult to break once you become addicted, if you know what I mean."
"Go ahead, feel free. This is your place after all. You don't need to ask me if you can smoke," I said, watching Golly pull out a Cuban cigar from its cellophane wrapping and pop it into the corner of his mouth. He lit it up, and it was quite meditational watching him.
"The question is, where to start?" said Golly. "There are so many outer-worldly, paradoxical things that have happened in the Gremlin's Woods over the years. Stories that go back for many, many generations. Long before you were ever born, Madison. Even my grandfather wanted absolutely nothing to do with those woods. Of course, I've heard stories about them over the years, and especially the one concerning the two sisters in the 1800s that mysteriously vanished in the Gremlin's Woods. But I never bought any of those stories for a moment. You see, Madison, when I was a young man, I was a perennial cynic, always skeptical about everything. I took all the stories that my grandfather told me with a pinch of salt. Have you heard of the Wendigo, Madison?"
"The Wendigo? Have I heard of the Wendigo? Why does that name sound awfully familiar? I think I have heard it mentioned before, but I can't say I know what it is. What is a Wendigo, Golly?" Golly blew out white circles of smoke from his mouth. They floated around the room until they dissipated, leaving behind a not too unpleasant aromatic smell. Normally I hated the smell of cigarette smoke, but Golly's cigar was oddly pleasant.
The smoking seemed to make Golly visibly relax. Then he said, "Many people think the Wendigo is just folklore, myth, or even legend. But the Wendigo is real. I can assure you of that, Madison. There is nothing remotely fictitious about this creature. This abominable creature, you could say."
"There isn't?" I asked.
"Where do you think legends or folklore started from in the first place, Madison? These so-called spurious claims were based on people's real-life accounts over the years. By all accounts, when people find something hard to believe, what do they do about it? They put it down to being a fanciful fairy tale, or a highly exaggerated story that bears no resemblance to reality whatsoever, because that sits much more comfortably with them, you see." It was the Native American Indians that first started to speak about the Wendigo. These highly intuitive, deeply spiritual people understood plants, animals, and the natural world in the way we just don't. They possessed a superior engagement with nature. Many encountered the Wendigo. They became victim to its artful cunning. Others were lucky to escape its grasp with their lives. The problem with the Wendigo, Madison, is he is a Machiavellian and artfully manipulative creature who employs cunning and deception to lure any unsuspecting victims to his predatory grasp. Rather like a Venus flytrap, you could say. Mythical legends are born, Madison, from these kind of first-hand accounts. Ostensibly for reasons I cannot explain, there have been numerous sightings of the Wendigo in the Gremlins woods, going back for many, many centuries, but people don't like to talk about it. Many believe the two sisters that disappeared in the Gremlins woods in the 1800s became victim to the Wendigo. Their bodies were never recovered. You see, the Wendigo, Madison, is believed to be a cannibalistic giant, a human being that has been transformed into a demonic monster, so to speak, that dines out on human flesh and has an insatiable appetite that cannot be satisfied. Hence the gaunt, very disfigured appearance of the Wendigo, that has a bottomless pit for a stomach, you could say, and is always ravenously hungry. And the presence of a human being makes the Wendigo salivate for the taste of human flesh, and he will do absolutely anything to get it. And when I say anything, I mean anything.
It sounds absolutely grotesque. What exactly does it look like? I asked. It was ironic I was even asking Golly such a question, that a week prior I would never have asked, because I would have dismissed it all as nonsensical. But now that I'd encountered a Bigfoot, I was open-minded to believe in anything. If Bigfoot was real, then the Wendigo might be too, as far as I was concerned. What once seemed impossible to me was now incredibly plausible.
The Wendigo is about 15 feet tall, said Golly. It's a humanoid-looking creature, very emaciated and skeletal, with sunken hollows for eyes that seem to glow supernaturally in the dark, if you know what I mean. It has sharp yellow fangs, razor-sharp claws, and facial features that resemble a goat, standing up on two legs. It has reindeer-like antlers, but it's hideously ugly. I cannot describe to you how ugly it is. It's also got the appearance of a man in its overall physique, if you know what I'm saying. It's hard to explain, really. A mix of goat and beast, you could say, as well as a humanoid being.
How do you know all this? I asked, as I was genuinely surprised by Golly's detailed descriptions of the Wendigo. How could he know this, unless he'd been witness to one himself? Golly was silent for a moment, staring into space.
I've seen the Wendigo myself in the Gremlins woods, Madison.
He shuddered.
You have no idea. It was horrifying. I barely escaped with my life. It is quite the story, believe me.
Please tell me all about it, I said. Start from the very beginning, will you, Golly? I need to hear this. You see, I'm trying to make sense of my Bigfoot encounter, so anything you share with me about the woods will help me try and connect the dots.
Very well. I will tell you everything that happened to me. I was 22 years old at the time. I was felling trees for a living. But at 22 years old, I was quite opinionated about things, and a wee bit arrogant, a side of my character I do not like. Thankfully, I'm no longer like that. I think when you're young, you really do think you know it all, don't you? When the truth is, you don't know much at all. I grew up skeptically scathing about most things that I could not physically see with my naked eye. If I couldn't see it, then it didn't exist as far as I was concerned. I was a black and white person. There was no murky grey middle ground for me. No in-between, so to speak.
Well, I understand exactly where you're coming from, Golly.
Don't forget, I was sceptically scathing until now. Well, I'm glad to hear it. Well, please go on with your story. Well, one day Mr. Crouch, the Mr. Crouch you know, his father, the owner of Red Vine Manor at the time, which I will for your benefit call Mr. Crouch Senior, asked me if I was willing to do a job for him. I had started up a landscaping cum tree felling business with two good friends of mine. We were advertising our services in the local town, and I hasten to say we started working with very little experience behind us, and as a consequence very nearly killed ourselves on numerous occasions, with some of the ridiculous risks we were willing to take at the time. We soon learnt the hard way that cutting corners when working with trees, well, could literally put you in an early grave, so we no longer wanted to play Russian roulette with our lives. I personally preferred to mow people's lawns for a living, and shape their bushes and so forth, but I was happy to take up any job that was offered to us. Everyone knows that tree felling is dangerous, but at that young age I believed I was invincible, as so many young people do. My friends were very much the same. I think there is the part of the brain that isn't fully developed in your early 20s. So at that age you're willing to take precarious risks that you would avoid when you get older and wiser. At 22 we were reasonably strong, especially my friend O'Reilly, who was much bigger than me and Patrick. When I was born my mother called me Goliath because I was such a large baby. But in size I bore nothing in comparison to O'Reilly. Everyone in town called O'Reilly the Beast, because of his gargantuan size. I think a lot of people hired our landscaping services because of O'Reilly, because he made them believe that any heavy-duty work would be a piece of cake for us. Mr. Crouch Senior wanted us to thin out the Gremlins woods for him, cut away vegetation, fell a few trees that needed putting out of their misery, and we were willing to do the job at a fair price. I naturally agreed, and Mr. Crouch Senior paid us well. At 22 you didn't turn down good work like that, especially when you've only recently started up your own landscaping business, which involved the occasional tree felling. I lived with my grandfather and my parents at the time, in this very same cabin, here at Holloway Ridge, so this has been my home all my life. When I mentioned nonchalantly over the dinner table one night that I'd taken on a job at the Gremlins Woods for Mr. Crouch, my grandfather completely lost it with me. My mother asked me how our landscaping business was going. She was very excited about her son taking the initiative to create his own entrepreneurial business with two of his friends. I told her that we'd taken a job with the Crouches at Red Vine Manor. We would be starting next week to clean up the Gremlins Woods, as it was rather overgrown and needed to be thinned out significantly. Suffice to say, my grandfather lost it. He went as white as a bucket of enamel paint. He looked at me and said, "No, you're not taking up that job in the Gremlins Woods. Not over my dead body, you're not." My mother chuckled. She said, "For goodness sake, Wallace, look at you. You're overreacting. What on earth is your problem? Aren't you happy for Golly here? He's done jolly well for himself, and I'm terribly proud of him. He started up his own landscaping business, and it's going swimmingly. And now you want him to forfeit some jolly good work opportunities, all because some two sisters in the 1800s went missing in the woods. That's ridiculous. A lot of things have changed since then. That was a long time ago, and we'll never know exactly what happened to them. But I'm sure that nothing untoward is going to happen to our Golly and his friends. Besides, he's big and ugly enough to look after himself, aren't you, Golly, dear?" "Of course I am," I had said. My grandfather removed his feather-like glasses from his eyes and fixed his steely gaze on my mother, who was his oldest daughter. "Don't be so damned naive, Sandra. Everyone knows there's a Wendigo in the Gremlins Woods. These things never die. They're demonically possessed. And that monstrous beast may have been there for hundreds of years for all we know. For centuries, even generations. Those two sisters in the 1800s disappeared because the Wendigo consumed them. It's as simple and straightforward as that. There is no mystery in that regard as to what happened to them. If people go missing in the Gremlin Woods, it's pretty clear what happened to them as far as I'm concerned. They've become a victim to the Wendigo. Do you want that to happen to your son?
Of course I don't want anything bad to happen to Golly, but nothing bad is going to happen to him. The Wendigo doesn't exist.
I was looking at my grandfather incredulously, not knowing how to comprehend that a perfectly intelligent human being like him could talk so much hogwash. Was he really that superstitious? He believed in all this stuff and nonsense, I thought. I really did believe he was completely stark raving mad.
For goodness sake, Wallace,
my mother chuckled, waving her arm around in protest. My mother always called her father by his first name. He didn't like being called Dad.
Listen to yourself. What you're saying is absolutely insane. Everybody knows the Wendigo is ancient Indian mythology. That's all it is. It's not real. My guess is those two sisters that went missing in the 1800s were abducted by some horrible man who probably killed them and disposed of their bodies. He obviously had a duplicitous agenda, and I don't want to go into that now, but it's probably as straightforward as that.
Sandra, you're my daughter, and I love you very much. But I hate to say this to you, dear. You can sometimes be incredibly naive. You think you know everything that goes on in the natural world. And I hate to say this to you, girl, but you haven't got a clue. I know things about the Gremlin's Woods that you have no idea about. I've never told you these things because I wanted to spare you the horror of some of the things I've learnt about the place. But I will promise you this, it is not safe. And if Golly goes in there with his friends, he is literally predisposed to having an encounter with the Wendigo. For some reason, the Gremlin's Woods is a haunt for the Wendigo. And I hate to think what could potentially happen to Golly and his friends if they start messing around in the woods. They will be in mortal danger. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not talking about this lightly.
Oh, Wallace, you are the end, honestly. Mum says you're so superstitious, and I can see why. I can't believe that you're actually swallowing all this stuff. It's absolute nonsense.
Don't worry, Pops, I lied. I'm not going to take the job with Mr. Crouch, if it upsets you so much. I appreciate that, son, very much indeed. I'm very grateful you won't. I don't want anything bad to happen to my most precious grandson.
But, sweetheart, don't let your grandfather put you off taking up a decent job like this over some ridiculous mythical legend that doesn't bear any weight to the truth.
I gave my mother a surreptitious wink. She understood I was just humouring my grandfather. I would humour him, make him believe I would not undertake the job at the Gremlin's Woods, and what he didn't know would never hurt him. I wished I'd kept my mouth shut. My grandfather could be so dreadfully superstitious I could not help but feel. You've made a very wise, salient decision, son, he continued. Believe me, you don't want to go near that formidable place. It's not safe. I had never ever lied to my grandfather before, and I certainly didn't like lying to him in these circumstances, but it was the only thing I could do to stop him from worrying about me. I laughed at his mention of the Wendigo, sharing my grandfather's beliefs with both of my friends, who cracked up laughing at the very idea that he believed in an ancient Indian legend. We all assumed my grandfather was ridiculously superstitious. I hasten to say that when we entered the Gremlin's Woods, we all became gravely quiet and somewhat stony-faced. We personally didn't engage in any light-hearted banter, which was usually the case when we worked together as a team. Something felt really off in the woods. It was ominously silent. So silent we could hear our own breathing. We heard absolutely no birdsong. There was no wind or breeze whipping up between the trees. Everything seemed hauntingly hostile and gloomy. I got the sense that we were not remotely welcome in this place, as if something didn't want us to be there. Now, at 22 years old, I was not going to allow my grandfather's foreboding words of warning to jeopardize this fantastic job opportunity of ours. So I tried to put away all my unsettled, discomposing thoughts and give them no heed. The trouble was I felt incredibly disquieted, and I noticed my subdued friends looked incredibly quiet. One thing about O'Reilly was he was a strapping man. He wasn't afraid of anything. But on this occasion I noticed the look of melancholy on his face, and his hands were actually trembling. We were in the process of cutting down some young saplings to thin out the trees, but something continued to feel off. "Hear that?" said O'Reilly, looking at me with wide, earnest eyes. "Hear what?" I asked him. "I don't hear anything." "That's the whole point, bro." "Don't you understand, golly? We're hearing nothing. Why are the woods so quiet? It's so sinister in here, so dark and tenebrific. Something is not right." He shook his head vehemently. "I don't like it in here one bit." "Don't be silly, O'Reilly," I said. "It's probably what my grandfather has said about these woods. It's beginning to spook you. There's nothing to worry about this place. It's probably as haunted as my jacket I'm wearing," I said, making a funny face, but no one laughed at my joke. Patrick looked reticently apprehensive and tried to hide his poker face from me, but I could see that he was also quite troubled about being in this place. He said to me, "You probably shouldn't have told us what your grandfather said. I think we are kind of freaked out about this place, yet we didn't believe in all this nonsense about the Wendigo." "For goodness sake," I said, "everybody knows it's pie in the sky." We worked together in silence, cutting back thick vegetation and stuff with our tools. But we were not in good spirits. There was no laughter nor chatter between us. The woods were heavy and oppressive. It felt as if they were closing in on us and sucking the very breath out of our lungs. I have never worked in such a cloying environment before, and I have never known a wooded area to feel so sinister and so claustrophobic, but it really did. Even the trees seemed to have become menacing, as if they had a life all of their own, and were watching us. At one point I told my friends I was going to take a leak. They nodded at me and continued to work in silence, resigning themselves to the fact that whether they liked it or not, we would have to finish this job. As I walked towards a tree where I intended to relieve myself, that was when in the distance I saw a speck of red. I wasn't sure what it was, but it looked like it might be a red shoe or a hat hanging on a tree branch. It was something small, but it got my immediate attention. It seemed to be reflectant, as the light spilling through the trees was bouncing off it, as if this thing was made of a shining metal or something. "What the hell is that?" I thought curiously. I'm naturally inquisitive by nature, so I followed this red thing, obliviously unaware that it was like a mirage, as the closer I walked towards it, the further it seemed to get. Before I knew it, not only had I not relieved myself, but I'd walked quite away from where my friends were, in the heart of the woods, as if that red thing, whatever on earth it was luring me away from them. That was when I heard O'Reilly's voice. "Come here, golly. You've got to see this now." I was naturally surprised. I didn't expect O'Reilly to be deeper in the woods. We were working in a different location, so what was he doing here? I heard his voice again. "Golly, get here quickly. You've got to see this." "Where are you, O'Reilly?" I called. "I'm here," he said. "Over here. Forget about the red thing. Come over here." I couldn't understand how he knew I was following a red thing. I thought that was extraordinary. O'Reilly kept saying to me, "I'm here, I'm over here." I was incredibly befuddled, but I followed the voice, and that was when I saw him.
"You saw O'Reilly?" I asked. "He must have followed you into the woods."
"No, it wasn't O'Reilly I saw. It was the Wendigo."
"You saw the Wendigo?" I repeated. Golly nodded, his face going pale at the recall.
It was the most hideous thing I have ever seen, Madison. There are no words. You have no idea. It was standing there mocking me, talking to me in O'Reilly's voice. Come here. I've got something to show you, golly. Don't you want to see it? You don't have to follow the red thing anymore. Ha ha! I don't know how to describe it to you, but this thing had some kind of magnetic hold on me, Madison, which I tried desperately to fight off. It was as if I was caught under some powerful hypnotic trance. Even if I wanted to escape from this thing, I could not. It seemed to have a supernatural power over me, and was pulling me towards it, like a puppet on a string. I was filled with terror. This thing was feeding off my fear, reveling in it, thoroughly enjoying it. I have never seen anything so repellent, so vile, so hideously ugly, so repugnant. It was human-looking, but made up of skeletal bones, with demonic imagery that you would expect to see in the devil himself. He had a head with reindeer horns on it, hollow sockets for eyes, where a red light appeared to glow. I guess in that moment I knew I was doomed. I was powerless to fight this thing off. It was calling all the shots and tormenting me in the same process. It was pulling me towards it. There seemed no escape for me. The Wendigo was taunting me, telling me to come closer. But this time he spoke to me in my grandfather's voice. Then he spoke to me in my father's voice. Then my mother's voice. Then O'Reilly's voice. And Patrick's voice. But when he spoke to me in my own voice, Madison, that freaked me out the most. Can you imagine how you would feel if someone is speaking to you in your own voice? The Wendigo knew how to imitate anyone I knew in my life, and it was toying with me and wallowing in my fear.
What were you feeling at this point in time? I asked. Did you think you were going to die? Did you think of your grandfather's warnings?
I didn't think about my grandfather's warnings. Only after the event I did. But I think all I wanted to do was to get out of this place. I could sense this thing was ravenously hungry and wanted to devour me. The look in those eyes, there is no way to describe it. But it wanted to eat me. That is for sure.
How horrible! I can't imagine. How on earth did you manage to escape this thing, if it had such a powerful hold over you?
That is where my story, Madison, becomes increasingly more bizarre. It may make you make sense of your own story, and I suspect it will. All of a sudden I heard this wild growling sound, and then appearing before me was this gargantuan Bigfoot. In normal circumstances, facing a Bigfoot in the wild would be the most terrifying thing for me to experience. But in contrast to the Wendigo, the Bigfoot was like seeing my grandmother, like the warm, fuzzy, reassuring feeling you get when you see her. The pendulum swung from a dreadful fear to a sizable relief. I suddenly saw light on the horizon, for I knew that the Bigfoot had come to my rescue. The Bigfoot screamed at the Wendigo and started shouting some words that I didn't understand. Hikani batali, hom fantalakina, hola tilabana, ho kizalakwa. And the Wendigo slunk away. The Wendigo was terrified of the Bigfoot and had no power over the creature. And I'm not exactly sure why that should be the case, but it clearly was. You would think at this point I would have run through the woods with all my life, but I couldn't move a muscle. The horror of what had transpired had rendered me helplessly immobile. It was like my legs had abandoned all their strength. The Bigfoot then ran up to me after the Wendigo had gone away, and that was when he spoke to me very sternly.
He spoke to you? I asked incredulously. That never happened to me. The Bigfoot I encountered never spoke to me.
Well, he spoke to me in a language that I didn't understand, but it was telepathic because I knew exactly what he was saying to me. Hantalinaka, hompashakika, halinatulobani. You need to get out of these woods. It is not safe in here. There are things wandering around here that your kind know nothing about. But these things can steal more than your body. They can rob you of your soul. You need to go at once, and make sure your friends leave as well, or I will scare them off the premises myself. And believe me, I have scared many of your kind half to death, just to keep them safe from this place. I am the guardian of these woods. Keeping these things in check is what I do day in and day out, because this creature will destroy you. Now I need you to go. This thing you encountered is evil beyond words. It dines on human flesh. You must go at once. Aminatila nako, ha sinatali, hom pola shokosono, halikasina. The Bigfoot's somber words made me find my strength, and when I returned to my friends who were thinning out the vegetation, they asked me where the hell I'd been. They weren't remotely impressed with me, because I'd been gone for so long. They didn't know I'd been lured into the depths of the woods by the Wendigo himself. I said to them, "We need to leave at once. It's not safe in these woods. We can't do this job." And the funny thing is, they didn't argue with me. I saw a sizable relief on their faces. Later they admitted to me that they felt very ill at ease working in the Gremlins woods. "There's something not right about the place," O'Reilly told me. "I don't scare easily, golly. But those there woods scared the bejesus out of me." I didn't tell my friends about my absurd encounter with the Wendigo. I mean, what would be the point of that? It would only serve to freak them out. I haven't told Huck about it, anybody about it except for you, Madison. But I think that my friends knew very well that something profound had happened to me, for us to leave so urgently. We told Mr. Crouch Sr. we couldn't do the job for him. We were uncomfortable about working in the Gremlins woods. And guess what? He wasn't remotely surprised about that.
I stared at Golly incredulously. "You think the horrifying encounter I had with that Bigfoot was because the Bigfoot was scaring me away from the Gremlins woods? He wanted to protect me from the Wendigo, rather than actually harm me?"
"That's exactly what I think," said Golly, nodding his head in agreement. "There are people who've had horrifying, terrifying, treacherous encounters with Bigfoots. But sometimes, Madison, things are not what they seem. I suspect that Bigfoot was keeping you away from the Wendigo, like you say. My advice to you is to stay well away from the Gremlins woods, and then you will be perfectly safe in the pool house."
I'm glad I paid Golly a visit that day. He helped me make sense of why I'd encountered an aggressive Bigfoot. Far from wanting to kill me, the creature was probably scaring me away from the Gremlins woods to protect me from the grievous danger the Wendigo imposed. I never went anywhere near the Gremlins woods again, but in the end I'm glad to say I did get a loan from the bank to pay for a fine arts degree, which I'm currently paying off, having found a great job. I'm now a happily married woman living in Portland, but Francis and Monty Pearson, Huck and Golly, as well as Mr. Crouch and his family, have become my best friends. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.